And I know you guys expect a lot of gaming content, but it just so happens that today, of all days, oh my gosh, I should not have any ads on this video. What is going on? Oh, it's embedded. I don't want to have to worry about ads. All right, we're gonna X this because this has ads. But anyway, I'm going to review this video of Perspective Philosophy debating Vaush. The reason I am doing this is because I work a job and I work on a computer most of the day, and I wouldn't say it's mindless work, but I have time to listen to things while I am working. So I listen to a lot of debates on philosophy, economics, politics, all that fun stuff. I also watch gaming videos and things like that. Well, listen to it, really. Science, all sorts of different subjects. Now, some of you might know this, some of you might not, depending if you watched the little podcast I was doing for a while that me and my friend Chris stopped because we ran out of time. Thank you for the follow. Um, so, um, one of the things is I studied economics, politics, and philosophy, all three as a triple major in college, which is fun. It's great stuff. And in philosophy, I was mostly interested in political and economic philosophy. Yes, those are things. And that's kind of my shtick. That's what I really enjoy. I know quite a bit about it. I mean, obviously, I'm no like PhD or professor or something, but at the same time, I'm not some nobody that doesn't know anything about this. I have studied it. I do know what I'm talking about, at least to some degree. And this triggered this video within the first few minutes got me upset. But I'm going to go ahead and hide this. So I'm going to hide that. Because I don't want you guys to have to worry about ads. Let's see here if I can pop this out.
Your property makes the government.
Say within the first 10 minutes. So I've only watched 10 minutes of this, but we're going to go through the whole thing. Let's see, theater mode. Sure, can I pop it out? I want to kind of pop it out. Default viewer. Mini player? No. Nope, that's not what I want. This will have to do. So I don't want to bother you with anything else. Ooh, wait. Give me a moment here. I might be able to add something. Do, 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 do. YouTube. Go. I can put this down here. Let's see. Make this as big or as little as we want. I wonder if I put full screen down here, if it will go. Tab. Yes, it'll go full screen there. Sweet. Well, then we can just make this as big or as small as we would like. And then I can hit play and stuff over here. And we can listen through this and go through everything.
Calling me on Discord. Oh
So,
shit, he's actually calling us? Oh, hello?
We're looking to the J.
Hello,
What?
man. Hey, man.
Get out of me.
All
Little
right.
chat
Well,
so you
I
guys
wasn't
can
expecting
discuss
this. I'm
this
very
with
glad that you
me.
did decide to talk to us. I wasn't expecting this at all.
Well, I do like talking to people. I'm a very social guy. All right, what do you got in your mind? I'm a pseudo socialist, huh?
Yeah, you're a pseudo-socialist, man. Like, yeah, I think that your ethical takes are bad, real bad. Like, really
This is
bad.
him
Like, so let me
talking.
explain. So, numerous times in the Destiny debate, like you.
So, like he's saying here, he's talking to Vaush about a debate that Vaush and Destiny had.
If I'm
And
honest, I think
he was,
and this was
kind of
from
reviewing
an outsider's
it,
perspective,
talking
I think
about
Destiny's ethics is absolutely trash, and I want to put that out there. I think he's a filthy liberal capitalist apologist. So I just want to make that clear. So when Destiny's criticizing you, it's not because I'm a Destiny simp. Destiny doesn't understand ethics either. Not that I'm the only one that does. Just Destiny's not very good at ethics, in my opinion. But
well, thank you for the opening disclaimer.
yeah. What I was going to say is essentially Destiny, I think, did show some inconsistencies in your position in relation to personal responsibilities in capitalism. You said that it would be okay to essentially enact roles in capitalism, such as a landlord or perhaps an Amazon CEO. I think that entering the capitalist
Well,
class as a
I
socialist.
said the former, not the latter necessarily.
Well, it was you said that it would be okay for an individual to maximize their was it flourishing or freedom within capitalism, and that's a-okay. And you even referenced an individual like being a liberal, saying that they should get taxed more, but then not doing it. And you said that you should be
So
sympathetic.
I said
Sorry.
at some point I might have said if I don't even know if I've said maximize beginning or if I've been gaslit. But when I said that, what I mean is I think that it is fundamentally morally neutral to thrive within an unethical system, given certain conditions. In this case, for me, the condition would be that the act of opening a new business doesn't actually further capitalism or harm any proletarians. Um, if anything, it has the potential to benefit them because they need jobs in this system. There's not much we can do about that for now. So no direct harm is done.
But aren't you a market socialist? Would you not say that they should, open a cooperative?
Oh, sure, I think that'd be lovely.
Okay, and then let's say they were a capitalist who, has the starting capital to start the business. Should they not, lend the money to the cooperative in order to start the business, and then indebt the cooperative to pay them back as a way to maintain that they are providing the starting capital, but then the responsibility is to not hire wage slaves. Like,
all right, here we go. This is just, oh, this triggers me on so many levels.
like, can we justify an individual's
Let's
do
put
the
this down
ends
here.
justify the means? Or
We can pause this, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys some things. Okay, just gonna go ahead and show you some definitions here so that we can all be on the same page of what we're talking about before I get into this rage content that I have here. Because this is rage inducing for me. Like, what they're talking about is rage inducing for me. So, let's look up several definitions of what socialism is and what capitalism is. Okay? And when I say socialism, I'm using the word either economically, politically, whatever. Economically, socialism is characterized by public control of the means of production and natural resources. Right here, Britannica, right? There's the definition right there. Socialism, social and economic doctrine that calls for public rather than private ownership or control of property and natural resources. Okay. So I'd say, well, I don't like that definition. Okay, we will go to Merriam-Webster's definition of socialism. Any of the various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and the distribution of goods. A system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned or controlled by the state. A stage of society in Marxism theory transitional between capitalism and communism and distinguished by unequal distribution of goods and pay according to work done. This third definition I disagree with because I look at socialism and communism is just a form of socialism. Now, Marx and Engels did state that socialism was a transitional period, and socialism inside of their theory is a transitional period, how they use it, but the term socialism was not invented by Marx. Marx was using it, Engels was using it, and its older use was as defined like up here, a system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned or controlled by the state. It's public ownership of the means of production. That is the important bit to take away. Here's another definition of what socialism is by Investatopia. Socialism is a populist economic and political system based on public ownership, also known as collective or common ownership, of the means of production. Those means include machinery, tools, factories used to produce goods that aim to directly satisfy human needs. See, right here in Investatopia, communism and socialism are umbrella terms referring to two left-wing schools of economic thought. Both oppose capitalism, but socialism predates Communist Manifesto, a 1848 pamphlet by Karl Marx and Engels by a few decades. Cool. Now let's look at capitalism. Definitions of capitalism, so we know what we're talking about. Capitalism. This is Britannica. It's also called free market economy, free enterprise economy, economic system, dominating the Western world since the breakup of feudalism, in which most means of production are privately owned and production is guided and income distribution largely through the operation of markets. Investatopia. Investopiad or whatever. Encyclopedia or Investopedia or whatever. Capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals or businesses own capital goods. The productions of goods and services is based on supply and demand in the general market, known as a market economy, rather than through central planning, known as planned economy or command economy. Then come over here, Webster's. And this is the definition I like the least. I disagree with Webster's definition of capitalism. And I'll tell you why here in just a moment. An economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decisions, and by prices, production, and the distribution of goods that are determined mainly by competition in a free market. I dislike this part right here. A corporate ownership. And the reason I don't like this little addition of corporate ownership is because corporations are not private entities. No matter how much anyone wants to tell you, a corporation is not a private entity. It is a public entity. That is why they're traded on the stock market. That is why there's such a thing as called going public. Okay? At that point, when a business goes from private ownership to public ownership, or going public and they sell their stock, they're selling ownership to the public. The public owns the company. Okay? When you buy a stock in a corporation, you own a little piece of that corporation. That's public ownership. It's now in the public sphere and no longer in the private sphere. This is an important distinction, right? Because generally when people say private market or the private sector, right? They include big businesses like Amazon, Apple, and all these corporations that are traded publicly. They are not private corporations because they answer to a board. They answer to shareholders. Those shareholders are the public, right? Anyone who owns stock in Apple, Amazon, Google, whatever, you own part of that company. It's available in the public to be owned by the public. They are not owned by an individual CEO. That CEO, there's a board, there's votes and stuff, and those shares matter, and percentage control matters, right? So when anyone says, oh, like Amazon is the epitome of capitalism, okay? Amazon is not the epitome of capitalism. Amazon is what you get when you allow for the public control of the means of production. Because Amazon is a public entity. It is a public corporation. It is owned by the public. Just got to get this out, right? So Amazon is a public entity. It is in the public sphere, even though it is not the government. Government is not the only thing that is public. Okay, this is where people get confused. And this is a nice little smoke and mirrors that people do. It's, oh, this is a private corporation. This is a private corporation operating in the free market. Therefore, it's bad. Look at all these bad things it does. Okay? That's in the public sphere. That's a publicly owned corporation. It's accountable to all the people who own shares of that company. Okay? Which is given over to the general public. Anyone who can buy a share owns a piece of that company. Has a stake in it. It's publicly owned. Okay? Not privately owned anymore. It's publicly owned. You got to get this, right? Like, this is very important. Public corporations are not private sector businesses. They are public sector businesses. Public sector does not only include, is not limited to the government. Okay? The public, like in common usage, right? In common language usage, sure, we think of Amazon as a private corporation, like as a private entity in the private sphere. They are a public corporation that operates inside of a public sector because their stock is public. Anyone in the public can own a piece of Amazon. If I want to go ahead right now and buy a share of Amazon, I can go buy a share of Amazon and I am an owner of Amazon. That is what that share means. That share means I am a part owner in Amazon. Therefore, it's open to the public. It's publicly owned means of production. The public can own Amazon and everything in it. They own a piece of that when they buy a share of Amazon. And anyone can buy a share of Amazon. Go ahead, go open a brokerage account. You can go own Amazon and be an Amazon owner. Okay, you own a share of Amazon. Technically, you own a piece of that business. It might be a minuscule, insignificant amount of ownership. That's true. Like if you buy one share, you're not going to be able to change the entire company, but you still own a piece. It might be an insignificant piece, but you own a piece. Like, this is important to understand. Jeff Bezos owns. Okay, so this is good. This is good. Um, I like your question. I'm gonna go ahead and answer. Sorry, I didn't have chat pulled up, so sorry. I was just on this and focused on the screen. I'll answer your question. If Amazon's publicly owned, right? Why is Jeff Bezos so rich? So he is so rich. He owns 10%, right? 10% of Amazon stock. Like how many shares of stock do you think Amazon issues? Like we can look this up, right? Because this is public information. Number of shares available of Amazon stock. Okay, so right now, Amazon stock is at $3,525, right? Let's see. Market cap is at 1.79 trillion, right? So that is how much the market's worth, right? This is how, if you divide up, you take the number of shares available, multiply it by this number, you get this number, which is the market cap, which is 1.79 trillion. Jeff Bezos owns 10% of Amazon. So he owns 10% of 1.79 trillion. That's why he's so rich. Like, that's why his net worth is so high. And then he gets paid pretty much a pittance from Amazon, the company, as the CEO, right? I think he makes like 80,000 a year is his income for pay, in just pure money. Like his paycheck comes out to something like 80,000 a year or something, or maybe like 100,000 or something. But it's very small. It's not like in the millions. He's sub 1 million in pay, like cash pay. Most of what he gets compensated in is Amazon stock, because every share he gets is worth like 3,000 something, right? So he could be getting compensated with like $5 million a year in compensation. Most of that is just in Amazon stock. That's where his compensation comes from. And this is what a lot of CEOs do, because the government, this is how they evade taxes. This is how you avoid taxes, people. Become a CEO, don't get paid a lot in cash, and instead get all of your money in stock, because you only get taxed in stock when you cash out. So if Bezos, if compensation can be either, well, see, if they have a dividend, like Amazon is not a dividend stock. This is the dividend yield right there. So he doesn't make any passive income from holding stock. It just goes to his net worth. So when you say, oh, Jeff Bezos is worth what, like $300 billion or something, what that takes into account is all of his assets, so all of his stocks in various different companies, all of his houses, what they're worth, and everything like that, minus the debt he owes. So if he has a mortgage on that house, you subtract what he owes on the mortgage from the value of the house. That's what the net worth is. So Jeff Bezos' net worth is like ridiculous. What is Jeff Bezos' net worth? It's something ridiculous. Jeff Bezos. All right, 201 billion. Okay, most of that, by the way, is going to be in Amazon stock, right? Because he has 10% of Amazon stock. Say you're right? He controls 10% ownership, right? 179 billion of that 101 billion is just Amazon stock. It's not cash liquid assets. He can't go out and buy, well, I don't know what his other investments are, but something like $22 billion are in other assets. So those are his houses, any sort of yachts or vehicles he might own that are worth millions of dollars, any property he owns, and then what's in his bank account, what's in his 401k, right? All of that combines into your net worth. There are people who are millionaires and are making $50,000 a year. You know how they're millionaires? Because they've been investing in a 401k for 30 to 40 years. It's been gaining interest, like it's been growing steadily. They've been contributing the max amount that they could and living off of nothing. They probably don't even own a house. Well, I mean, if they were making 50K 40 years ago, they probably own a house. You could own a house at that rate back then, not now. But like, they probably own a house. They probably have a substantial 401k for their retirement, and they're millionaires. Technically, their net worth is in the millions, right? But they don't have that liquid cash assets, right? You wouldn't consider them, you know, a millionaire in the general sense, right? Like when we say, oh, this person's a millionaire, we think, oh, they have tons of cash to just burn. But there's lots of people who are millionaires at the $1 or $2 million, and all of it's tied up in a 401k and in a retirement plan that they can't even touch if they're not old enough, and without massive tax penalties. Like, this is where people's net worth comes in, and this is where we look at people's where we come up with Jeff Bezos' net worth at 201 billion, right? I almost guarantee you that like almost all of that money is locked up in assets, that he does not have that much cash liquid money. He probably has a lot of cash liquid money, probably several $100,000 cash liquid that he can just go and blow on stuff. He's rich, he's fine, he's never going to have money problems. That's obvious. But he doesn't have $200 billion sitting in the bank. His $200 billion net worth is mostly in Amazon stock, like over 90%, as we can see. Over, like, I think what? Let's see. Like almost 90% of his net worth, almost, I think it's like 88% of his net worth is just in his ownership of Amazon. His portion of ownership of Amazon, which is a lot. It's 10%. But to give you an idea, so we have this number, 1.7 trillion. If I pull up a calculator real quick, we can determine roughly how many shares there are. Right? Calculator, we don't need it that big. That is ridiculous. I don't know why it was maximized. But we can come over here, right? So we have 179. That's 179. And then that's 179,000, 179 million. 179 billion, there's 1.79 trillion dollars. Divide it by 3,525.5. That's roughly how many shares of Amazon stock there are. 507 million. So if you own one stock of Amazon, sure, you're an owner of Amazon, just like Jeff Bezos is. Your power in the company is 1 over this huge number, right? You are a drop of water in an ocean. Can you change the tide? Probably not. Jeff Bezos is 10% of the company. Even still, he probably can't just snap his fingers and make changes at Amazon. And that's the thing. When a corporation goes public, it is no longer able to make private decisions. Jeff Bezos can't snap his fingers and raise everyone's pay, no matter how much he would like to. Say Jeff Bezos wants to donate half of his stock to everyone in the company. Like, he wants to do that. He wants to spread out 5% of Amazon stock across the entire corporation and give it to everyone equally. He can't do that. Why can't he do that? Because Amazon is not a private corporation. It is a public corporation. Therefore, it is answerable to a board of directors who have controlling interests in the company. And they can say, no, we're not going to allow you to give that much stock away to employees. They can just block that. So how do they decide who's on the board of directors? Usually there's a vote among the shareholders. So say you have controlling shares, right? So you have enough of this that they ask your vote, right? So usually a controlling share has to be around 1% of the total ownership of the company, right? So if you own 1% of the company, you basically kind of get a vote. And you vote on board of directors. So you elect, the board of directors is elected. Usually, board of directors, usually there's some collusion on getting onto the board of directors. With that, usually like people who own like 10-15% of the company say, hey, I'll vote for you, you vote for me, and because we have so much of the company, we'll be able to swing the vote to get us both on the board of directors. Now, there are some positions on the board of directors that are usually the other board members that are voted on interview and hire other board members in these positions, because once the board has enough of the controlling votes that they can do whatever they want, then they can decide who else goes on the board of the directors. They can have an interview process and hire whoever they want. Usually they hire people who know how to run businesses and are very good business people to make deals or star power to bring attention to the company. But the first board members they're all technically elected to the board. So a board of directors is usually elected. But like I was saying, there's a lot of backroom deals on who gets to be in the board of directors. Then once they have a controlling interest, they can cut everyone else out because they have a controlling interest. But it doesn't change the fact that public corporations are in the public sector. And the reason that's important is because public entities work different than private entities on a lot of different ways. One, there isn't a private owner that can snap their fingers and make decisions, right? So say you have a small mom and pop shop, right? These are private businesses. They're private entities. No one owns them except for the business owners. They can make a snap decision and decide to pay everyone more money. They just make the decision and it happens. They can decide we're offering this product, not that product. Snap decision, it happens. Business owner decides you're fired. I'm raising you to a manager. I'm demoting you to a normal employee, right? There's a lot more direct connections, and there's one person. Like, this is the major thing. There's one person or a small group of people, like maybe a family-owned business, right? Like, like your parents started up a restaurant or whatever, and then they pass it on to their kids because they're too old and they're retired. And, they have like 3 kids, and the 3 kids all own the business, and they kind of make decisions together, and they make snap decisions. But it's a very small group. They own everything involved, and there's no one else out there that owns anything of it other than them. And this includes co-ops, right? They'll bring up co-ops here. Co-ops are private entities. They're small groups where everyone owns the business, okay? But the idea is that they're small. It's not a public entity. Not everyone in the public owns it. The workers own it in the co-op. Just the people who've put in time into the business. Only those people have ownership of that business. Now, they all own it equally, and they all just kind of make decisions or divvy up work, but it's only owned inside of that private circle. No one else has control, right? Say tomorrow some trillionaire out of nowhere, like um I'm discussing this not because people are demanding more taxes out of Amazon. They can just demand as much taxes as they want out of Amazon possible. I don't particularly care. The reason I am annoyed with this is in this video and a lot of videos of um, people talking about socialism, about capitalism, and talking about the private sector versus the public sector and how we need the public ownership of the means of production. You don't want the public. Like, they're either one, they're using these terms incorrectly, which if they're using the terms incorrectly, that's fine. Uh, this is more of a way to say, hey, you're using the terms incorrectly. If they're not using the terms incorrectly, like a lot of economists know the difference between a public and private entity. They know public corporations are not considered um yeah, what they probably mean is private or public interest. um yeah, no, it's fine. And the thing is I want to correct this because like it's it's a weird thing that I studied I was a triple major in college in politics, economics, and philosophy. So I'm kind of in this weird middle ground where yeah, no, a lot of people don't like economics. Mostly because people start thinking of yeah, it's a very great mix of an education. You get very different views of everything because the philosophy is really kind of balanced and cares more about oughts and shoulds than anything else, and the politics is like all about just winning and saying what you need to, and the economics ground is like, here's how markets and stuff work, and here's what all these terms are that everyone else is using incorrectly actually mean. It's really it was really, yeah, ought and how, yeah, that's right. Those it basically, I studied all three of those, and it gets confusing in my head of, for is this an ought or is this a how or is this an is? It's all very interesting, yeah. Now the thing is when you're going to be a socialist, you want to come out and say I'm a socialist, and you're advocating for the public control of the means of production. I don't think they actually understand what that means. Like you said, I think they're probably using the term incorrectly, but they mean we need to look at what the public interest is. Like, how can we best help people? But when you look at it, everything they point to is this is a public entity. This is a public entity. This is a public entity. You're criticizing the private sector over what the public sector is doing, and you're advocating for more public control, more large corporations, and things like that. Now we're fixing to get to a point here in just a second, where he talked. Actually, he just did. Like, if I back this up a couple of seconds, he's going to mention wage slaves, and I'll get into this in here in
Oh,
just
sure.
a
I think
minute.
that'd be lovely.
Okay, and then let's say there were a capitalist who, has the starting capital to start the business. Should they not, lend the money to the cooperative in order to start the business, and then indebt the cooperative to pay them back as a way to maintain that, like, they are providing the starting capital, but then the responsibility is to not, hire wage slaves. Like, can we justify an individual's, do the ends justify the means?
Oh, the audio is kind of low on that. Let me go ahead. I can turn that up. Tell me if that's better.
Or, in relation to, giving people
Well, the end's
jobs.
always
Is that better? Yeah, I normally stream video games, and video game audio is like super loud, so I have to turn it down. But this is fine. So, wage slave. This this is really cool. Wage slave is this terminology, a cross between philosophy and economics, devised by Marx and Engels, the communist people, the people who developed communism as an ideology. And this is the important thing. When you say communism and socialism, there is no real difference between the two. Socialism is actually a term that predates Marx. It was used decades before Marx came around and started using it. And it basically just means public control of the means of production, public control of the economy. So whenever anyone says communism or socialism, it's a very esoteric distinction between the two, where Marx and Engels wanted to divide them into two separate things, but really what socialism means, it encapsulates communism. Communism is a form of socialism, where communists want to break apart and not be considered socialist because socialism had a bad rap even back in the day of Marx. Like, no one wanted to be, like, very few, it was not popular to be a socialist. And so if you want to make a populist movement like Marx wanted to do and have the public rise up, the workers rise up, the way you do that is not by stating that you're a socialist. You come up with a new term like communism and say it's a brand new thing. So you take an old package and wrap it up in nice fancy wrapping paper and call it something new. That's basically what Marx did and had a few changes against socialism. But he also came up with the idea of wage slaves. And what a wage slave is, wage slavery is this idea that people work, right? People work, and a business owner pays you a wage, but that they don't pay you what you're worth, right? Wages are static, like value. It comes, there's two competing theories, right? One is very bad, and pretty much any economist will disagree with it almost immediately and say that it's total BS because it is total BS. But it's the only way you can get communism to work. This is the labor theory of value. That is the name of the theory. It's labor theory of value. And the labor theory of value states that what something is worth depends on the labor that was put into it. So this is very important, like, for their thing. So what they say is here's the evil capitalist, right? And say evil capitalist wants to build widgets, right? And he hires somebody to build a widget, and they build a widget, and it takes them 2 hours of work to build a widget. He then sells the widget for $15, right? Whatever it is, right? And he pays you $5 an hour, right? So, or let's make it $16 he sells it for, and he pays you $5 an hour. So you get $10 in wages for the 2 hours, but he gets $6 of profit from selling the widget for $6, and he takes that. The idea of wage slavery is that because you worked, you put 2 hours into it, and then it had a value of $16. What that labor was worth was $8 an hour. So you should have been paid $8 an hour, and the capitalist is stealing from you, the business owner is stealing from you because he took a profit. So by making a profit, he is either exploiting the worker or he's exploiting the consumer, one or the other. Either he's overvaluing his product or he is undervaluing someone's labor. And basically, to the labor theory of value, labor should equal the price of the product. period. And the labor is what gives something value. So, in this, say in this world, right, a communist decides or a socialist decides, yeah, that's why they think capitalism is theft. Because they have this labor theory of value. But here's where it breaks down, and here's why no economist will ever agree with it, and they agree with the second one, the second theory I'll explain. And that is that, say your labor, right? Say we say labor is worth $10 an hour, right? So every hour someone works, they should be paid $10 for that. And however long it takes to make something, you multiply how long it takes into number of hours of labor, multiply it by 10, that's how much it's worth, right? And that's what it should be sold at. That way, the worker gets all of the money for their labor, and the product is not sold at a price that exploits the consumer over what it's worth. But here's where it breaks down. If I hire somebody to make cubes out of garbage cubes, and I try to sell them, right? And say it takes 5 hours to make a cube of garbage. This is just rancid smelling garbage. It's not art or anything like that. It's just a cube of garbage. And it takes 5 hours to make garbage into a cube. To the labor theory of value, the person who makes the garbage into a cube should get paid $50 for every cube they make, because it takes them 5 hours, and labor is valued at $10 an hour. And people should buy the cube of garbage for $50. Like, that is their mindset, right? And that's where it breaks down, right? There are some things that aren't worth very much and are very hard to do and take a lot of time, but aren't valuable to society. And then there are things that are very easy to do and don't take a lot of labor and are very valuable to society. And this is where labor theory of value breaks apart. Now, the other theory of value is the subjective theory of value, in which the value of the item is determined based on what someone is willing to pay for it, what they think it is worth. So, in this way, right, a business owner, say I want to make widgets again. Yeah, say I want to make widgets, right? Yeah, no, a lot of people get this. It's very intuitive, but they don't know what it's called. This is where the academic part comes in, right? Subjective theory of value. What it comes into is, you know how to make widgets, right? And I want you to make widgets. And you say it takes 2 hours to make widgets. And I say, okay, well, I'm willing to pay you $5 an hour, right? So we'll say I'm trying to make it as cheap as possible. I say, oh, I'll pay you $4 an hour. You say, no, that's too cheap. I won't make a widget for $4 an hour. If you rate, like, I'll make a widget at, I want $10 an hour. And I say, no, I won't do $10 an hour. Say I'll do $8 an hour. And you say, cool. I will make the widget at $8 an hour. That's acceptable to me. So you start making widgets. You make widgets. I pay you for the hours you worked, right? At the agreed rate. Because we found where I valued your work at and what you valued your work at. And we came to an agreement of what that was worth. And we both agreed that your work is worth $8 an hour. And so I agreed to pay that. I pay you, you do the work, you make widgets for me. Now I take those widgets, right? And it takes you 2 hours to make a widget. So, okay, that cost me $16 because we're assuming that these have no material costs or everything else that goes into it. for the sake of easiness. So I then take this widget and I sell it to somebody. I take on the risk, right? So I'm minus $16 because I paid you to make the widget, and it costs me $16 for your labor. And then I take it to this guy, and this guy is like, doesn't care about widgets at all. He doesn't like widgets. He's like, I'll give you $1 for it. And I'm like, yeah, I can't sell it for $1. It's not worth that. He's like, I don't want a widget. So I'm stuck. I lose out on $16, right? Like, I'm stuck with a widget that I thought I could get more out of, or that I thought, I could at least recoup my costs. But people don't want the widget, right? For whatever reason, people don't want this widget. So I lose money. Like, I took that risk. And the widget's value is not $16. Therefore, it's not worth the labor to do it. Or turn this around the other way. I make a widget. You make the widget. I pay you to make the widget. You make the widget, and people just love this widget, right? You can't make enough widgets to satisfy everyone who wants it. So I'm like, I go to like an auction type system. I'm like, what are you willing to pay for it? What are you willing to pay for it? And I find the highest bidder, the person who values the widget the most. He pays the highest rate, but obviously we can't do everything on a auction basis, right? So at first I'll sell the widget at maybe like 20 or something dollars, so I get something out of it. But it sells off the shelves faster than you can make it. So I go, okay, well, these are going faster than you can make it, and people are going to get upset, so I'm going to raise the price. I keep raising the price until I find a point where I can produce widgets and it meets the demand. And this is where supply and demand come in, right? I have a certain amount that I can make a supply for, and there's a certain demand for it. Where those two things intersect is the perfect price point, where everyone who can afford it will afford it, and as much as can be produced will be produced at a cost-effective rate where everyone's happy. And so while you might value your labor, and I might value your labor at $8 an hour, and it takes 2 hours to make the widget might be worth like $200. And that's a huge profit margin for me. But I also take the risk when I have you make the widget, that I'm going to get nothing for it. And this is how the subjective theory of value comes into play, right? That everything's value is subjective. People aren't going to pay for a cube of garbage just because someone spent 5 hours doing it. They're only going to pay for things and value things that they find valuable. There's a downside to this, though. A lot of times, societies don't value things that they should, right? This is a should argument, right? Like, this is how it works. Like, the subjective theory of value is a should, is a how, right? This is how it works. But people don't always value things that they should, right? Like, drugs that are harmful for you are very valuable. Like, you can make a crap ton of money on the black market selling drugs. Not that anyone should sell drugs. I'm not advocating for it. But this is where black markets come from, right? Something is valued by society, right? The private sector wants it, but the public sector, in this case the state, the government, says no to it and prevents it from being sold by the private market. But private markets have a tendency to give the middle finger to the government and will try to exist anyway if there's a high enough demand. Basically, black markets pop up when there's such a high demand that it overcomes the negative side effects of getting caught doing something that the state has said no to. And so, when socialists come up and say, wage theft, the people who do wage theft, like in the private sector, in a private economy, you can't have wage theft. And the reason you can't have wage theft is everyone makes their own private decisions, and you can sell your labor for however much you want in the private market. Wage theft does happen. It only happens in the public sector when someone forces you to either buy labor at a higher rate all right, let's play devil's advocate. Okay, so exploit poor areas. That is a possibility. But here's the thing. You are selling your labor in a private market based on what you think your labor is worth. So, take a poor area, right? Most, and this is something interesting on how economies develop. You don't go from every economy starts off poor and builds up and up as high as it can until it eventually collapses. All economic activity eventually goes into downturns. So there's high points and low points. When our economy is doing well, the general line moves up, which means each downturn turns into an upturn that's higher than the previous upturn. So take a poor area, right? You do not go, any poor area very rarely goes from poor to immediately rich or goes from non-industrial to industrial. Like, you have to start somewhere, right? And so take for a poor area, right? If it's all private, privately controlled, private decisions being made, I come into an area and say, hey, I'll pay you 25 cents an hour. And someone says, I can't even live off of 25 cents an hour, but right now I'm getting paid nothing. Well, people aren't going to stay and keep getting paid 25 cents an hour or $1 an hour or whatever, right? They need to survive. So you can't pay people less than what it takes to survive and expect them to keep working for you. They won't, because they can't survive. Now, I'll take this and steelman this to the extreme. So let's say, okay, well, I'm not talking like that level of exploitation. I'm talking about the bare minimum that someone could get away with, where people could still survive, right? And they could barely still survive, but I'm paying them just survival rate. Nothing above that. They can't make any savings. Every penny goes towards some bill or something. They can't have any fun. Or else, if they do have any fun, they're not going to eat, or they're going to lose their house, or whatever. The thing is you can't pay people below survivability rates in a private system because no one will work for that. And if they do, they'll only work long enough so that they can start up something that they can survive on. For example, say in a private system, some wealthy person comes in and says, I'm going to pay you absolute garbage wages. Like, you can't survive on this. And you say, well, I can't survive on this, but there's no jobs in the area. They're going to work long enough so they can buy some vegetables or something for food. They're going to take those seeds and they're going to start a garden. People are like, the idea in a private system is that people will do what they need to survive. If you're left out in the middle of nowhere, there's no social safety net going to save you. You're going to hunt for your food. You're going to spend your time building your own shelter. You're going to spend your own time growing your own food. This is how all economies start, is everyone is out for their survival. Something like that, right? I think we're in a socialist system. Like, I think, honestly, evolution, revolution, something like that. But um, the thing is that we are in a socialist system, not in a capitalist system. That's my main point I want to drive home to people is don't complain about capitalism when we're not in a capitalist system. Like there's a lot of things that I can show that we are not in a capitalist system. No one owns property. Like you don't own a house. You rent a house from the government. You know, that's called property taxes. If you don't pay your property taxes, the government comes and takes your house. So you don't own your house. Like even homeowners, they don't own the house. They don't pay their taxes to the government. Government takes away their house. And that's totally legal. The state owns your house. You lease your house from the government. You lease the property from the government. And if you improve the property, say you just get a plot of land and you build a house on it, they tax you more because now that piece of property that you were renting from the government is now worth more and they can take more rent from you, basically. That's how property taxes work. So if your house goes up in value, so does your taxes because it's a percentage off of your property's worth. Okay? So you don't own, no one in the United States owns any property. It's all controlled by the government. It's controlled by the state. So there are no private landlords. Yes, you renovating your house benefits the government because by renovating it, it increases the value of the house. Therefore, they can charge more. Exactly. You're contributing to society. When you fix up if you have a rental property and you fix up the rental property, you're helping the government. You're helping the state. Okay? When you charge them rent, all you're doing is what the government's doing for that property already. You have to pay rent on that property anyway. The government is the largest landlord. The United States government is the largest landlord in the United States. Well, I mean, usually it's county governments that charge property taxes. Any property tax works that way. I'm not sure if the UK has property tax, but yeah, if it's property tax, I think the UK has property taxes. Let me look up. I'll look this up for you. United Kingdom property. Does the United Kingdom have property tax? Oh. Yeah. No, you guys don't have property tax or land tax. That's cool. Right? Instead, council tax is usually paid by the resident of the property. Only in the case of unoccupied does the owner become liable to pay it. All right, so there's still a tax. It's called a council tax. Is a tax on property. In principle, it may be an allowable deduction where the property expenses are deductible. And a personal tax, generally where is only charged at 50%. Okay, so this is what they said right here. So this is what the valuation tribunal service states what the council tax is. It's a mix of a property or personal tax. So it sounds like, yeah, the council tax depends on the value of the property, but it is not calculated as a simple percentage. Instead, it is allocated to a council tax band. So there's basically a range of valuation, and you pay a fat amount based on that. Stamp duty, land taxes, You pay when you buy. Okay, so this is like a sales tax on property you buy. So yeah, the council tax um, though according to this right here, based on the valuation tribunal service, is it's a mix of a property tax and a personal tax. So the government, you have to lease yourself from the government, according to this, because it's based on how many people reside at a residence. Yeah, you're subjects to the queen. I mean, the state owns you in a sense. So, like, this is like, yeah, see, in the United States, property tax is usually levied on the local government and no national levies on real estate. So the United States government doesn't levy property tax, but our local governments, our city governments and state governments collect property tax. So our states own all, well, that makes sense because we're the United States. Each state is their own kind of like little country, at least how the government was set up. So, as you can see, like taxes are basically rent. When you pay taxes on property, or I guess in the UK, to lease yourself from the government, that is crazy. It makes me glad to be in the United States. I don't have to pay for myself. Um, I'm an individual and I own myself at least, right? Everything else is owned by my government, but at least I'm not owned by the government. But yeah, no, so yeah, that's a lease. If you don't pay the taxes on the property becomes the government's. It's fairly standard practice. Oh, I can't. Yeah, right. I have to make money so I can survive there, right? Like if I didn't do any work, I don't even think I would qualify for food stamps because I'm a guy. I actually did that once in college. This is how messed up. Yeah, everywhere's socialist to some extent. I mean, for the most part, most places are socialists, socialist governments, so socialist states. It's very common. It's just how much socialist are you versus how much of a private existence you have. Yeah. More importantly, it's not capitalist. Exactly, right? Like we don't have capitalist societies. So I don't know why everyone's complaining about a capitalist system when we don't live in one. We live in a socialist system, and I'd like to get out of this socialist system that basically, you know, makes me feel completely, worthless to society. Like that it doesn't value me at all because it doesn't. The corporation I work for could care less if tomorrow I disappeared off of the face of the earth. They would just replace me with some other cog. And it's a public corporation. And that's why, because there is no person that's in charge. There's no person that interacts with people. They don't know who their employees are. They don't care because it's a public entity. It's controlled by the millions of people, the thousands upon thousands of people who own stock in the company. Okay, well, I mean, I guess the company cares a little bit because I own stock of the company. So I own a bit of it. I care about my existence. Therefore my corporation cares about my existence. Just not enough to, do what I want it to do. But besides the point, this is squabbles. It's still a public entity that therefore has no personal touch to it. And capitalist societies, I mean, would be, if you were to look at a real capitalist society, um, you would see mostly small businesses. Businesses would not become public. There wouldn't be a stock market to trade stocks. And everyone would discuss their own wages. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, wannabe socialists say these are the problems, and I say, sure, yeah, those are the problems, and then they say, I want to introduce socialism and the government to fix these problems, and I'm saying, no, that's why we have the problems in the first place. Like that's what created the problems you're complaining about. You want the opposite of what you're advocating for. And that's what all these socialists are. Like almost every socialist, when you get them down and say, "Here, what do you want?" Well, I want this. I don't want big corporations that don't pay taxes. I want to see, people own their means of production. I'm like, okay, like I agree with that as a capitalist. As a capitalist, I think everyone should own themselves, own their property, own their means of production. Yeah, their means of production. That's right. The memes. That's how us internet people make a living, right? With memes. The memes of production. Now the memes. Like uh, sometimes I'm I'm dyslexic, so when I start talking fast or getting ahead of myself in my thoughts, then just words blim together, so they sound weird. But let's continue this because I haven't even finished watching this video. I got 10 minutes into it before I decided I have to review this because it was
It's
so
justify the means
triggering.
for me, right?
Well,
Because
but this is the thing. Like when you say that you're a consequentialist, not always. Like when we talk about like principles, like many consequentialists hold to certain
like,
principles. Henry Sedgwick being a particular one. Henry Sedgwick, and this is like Peter Singer, so on. They understand that there are certain standards from which we all must meet in order to maximize utility. That you
yeah, no problem. And so this is good. Um, this is why I like perspective philosophy. He is when he is talking about pure philosophical or ethical concepts, he's doing great. He knows his stuff, which I expect from a PhD student. Yes. Okay. I'm going to mute my mic here for just a moment. I'll play the video a little bit and be listening.
utility and utilitarianism is dependent upon not just an individual's engagement within a system, but the perpetuation of that system in one's normative capabilities and
Right.
universalized
I mean, yeah,
ethical
we can.
structure.
So we can run it. So my argument would be that the act of opening a business as a socialist is morally neutral because you're not adding harm to the world, because there's no negative utility being added to the world from your actions. Now, I think it'd be good. Now, that's neutral. I think it would be good if they went ahead and made a cooperative because I like cooperatives. Um, I like what they do. I think that adds positive utility to the world. I think that'd be a good thing. I think we should encourage those people to do a good thing. I don't think it makes a person a hypocrite for doing the morally neutral action, even if they're a lefty.
Why is it morally neutral if, like, say, for example, the business wouldn't exist and hire wage slaves to begin with?
Well, because the people who went there to become wage slaves would just go be wage slaves somewhere else were it not for that business. Your
Mhm.
addition of that business doesn't increase the amount of wage slavery in the world. Those people would have had to have worked anyway. You're not increasing the dependence the proletariat has on wage labor. You're just providing them another option.
Okay, I would accept that to be the case in certain necessary industries. I don't think that necessitates, like, so for example, like, and then again, like, you could also like create a system, you could create a business which had a fairer structure. Like, there's no necessitation of having that, like, that business structure. You are basically abiding by the moral minimum of the state, which we have already agreed is deficient.
Well, no, I don't think that it's morally deficient to open businesses. I think that the existence of capitalism is morally deficient. But I think that about pretty much every system. I don't think there's ever going
Okay.
to be an economic system.
So, yeah, I have someone in the chat. No, it's someone else. Uh huh. It's a viewer, wonderful viewer who asks questions in my chat. I'm pretty small Twitch following. But I really appreciate chatting here and asking questions. It makes it a lot easier to stream when instead of me talking to myself the entire time. But yeah, no. Yeah, a lot of people will try to convert you to Marxism and socialism because they think they're morally justified, which some of the problems that they mention are legit. Like, they're legit problems. But they just want the wrong solutions. They don't understand how things are, why we're at where we are at. Yeah. She never asked me. Yeah, probably do it here. Yeah, they just, yeah, not in a mean way. I don't think socialists. I think most people, clarify this, most people have their intentions in the right place. They want to help people. They see what they see as injustices and want them corrected. And then they do what they think is best to reach that. Now, sometimes people, I think there's two types of socialists. There's the socialists who really want to help people, and there are people who are looking for power and see socialism as a means to gain power. And it's very hard to know the difference between the two. I'm going to go ahead. Let's see, where are we at here on this video? We're 5 minutes in. Like I said, I've already listened 10 minutes of this already before getting on this stream at the end of my shift at my job. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. My father-in-law needs some help with something real quick, so I'm going to step out just for like a minute or two, and then I'll be right back, okay? And I'll just go ahead and play this video while that's going on so you can kind of listen to it. And if you see a strange woman hop on and start talking with you, that's my wife. And I think she's wonderful. And
I don't do politics.
she doesn't do politics or philosophy and stuff, but she's fun to chat with. So if you see her, say hi. She sometimes gets on and streams under my channel anyway. So I'll be right back and leave this on for you to listen to.
That I think is truly moral. There are always going to be problems with it, as there are problems with being an American citizen and flourishing within this country. If you do well in this country, or if you pay your taxes, you're implicitly supporting the stuff the government does with the taxes, which, depending on your opinions on the military-industrial complex, could be quite negative. But all that added up, I just there's no additional negative utility being brought about by opening a business. Now, there are instances where something like that could add negative utility. For example, if you're an Amazon CEO, you have so much influence. You're not just opening a business, you have the ability to direct the market. As an Amazon CEO, you have the power to move people towards and away from certain economic designations in ways that regular business owners can't. So in that case, I would say if you have that kind of power, then you should be doing something, because if you don't, the ripples you leave in your wake are going to do harm. But that's not like a regular business. Amazon's obviously a beast in and of itself.
Okay, yeah, which I agree with. So what you would say is that an individual's like responsibility is directly tied to their power within the system.
Yeah, and whether or not their engagement in an action contributes to negative utility in the world.
Okay, so but in terms of like your engagement within the system, you could say that like an individual's like responsibility for the system is dependent upon their power and the propagation within the system. So as an Amazon
Politics? Oh gosh. Politics has changed so much in the last 5 years. um politics is what used to be people discussing on how to run a country. But politics today is who can call who Hitler or Stalin the fastest. That's pretty much state of politics around the world. Who's Hitler and who's Stalin? Um, yeah, no, I get it. It was my attempt to say it's a rush to say who's Hitler and Stalin. No one calls anybody Stalin. No one calls anybody Stalin. That's not an insult. Which is kind of sad because Stalin is like responsible for way more deaths than Hitler ever was. But they're both horrible people. So we'll continue on this.
On CEO, you're able to
let's
propagate
see.
the system in a lot greater way, or undermine the system in a lot greater way, and so your responsibility for undermining it or perpetuating it is by and large culpable to your power. Like it's directly related to your power.
Yeah,
All right. So this is where perspective philosophy really does well when he's talking ethics. When he's talking ethics and just pure philosophical concepts. Obviously, he's a PhD student of philosophy. He's going to know his philosophical terminology and theories very well. I think that's a lot of the problem. I think that's why capitalism is so misunderstood by philosophers.
I'm sorry for the loud annoying sounds. I gotta get these done.
Oh, it's fine. I don't even think they're picking up on my mic.
Well, I'm just saying, if they do hear it, I'm sorry.
All right, your apologies. Oh, that's probably getting picked up.
I tried to make you.
Actually, it's not. Okay. So, the big thing is that he's really good at the ethics here. And totally lost my train of thought. See what I was talking about. Capitalism misunderstood by philosophy people. Philosophers misunderstand capitalism a lot because Marxist ideology was not only an economic ideology, it was a philosophical ideology too. It was built up in both. It was built up as all three. It was built up as an economic, political, and philosophical theory. Communism and Marxism was. And as such, there isn't really a capitalist counterpart to it. Capitalism is basically just an economic theory. Like, philosophers' understanding of capitalism comes from Marx. And Marx does not portray capitalism accurately. And so the only philosophical understanding of capitalism is the wage theft and things like that Marx came up to describe capitalists. And that's part of the problem, is philosophy doesn't have really good economic philosophers that know what capitalism is. As bad as that sounds, it's true. It's a major defect of economic philosophy. Is it all centers around Marxism and communism and Stalinism and Leninism. It's like all the philosophical work for how the economy works, all the philosophical thinking done on it are done by Marxists, for better or worse. And so they set the terms of how philosophers look at the economy instead of like economists setting how the economy should be looked at, like in philosophy. Like you don't have, there are very, very few people who are philosophers who are interested in economics that actually have a degree in economics. Usually they just study Marxist economic theory because it's philosophical in nature and that's what they're really into. And so they get a weird idea of what capitalism is. And I think perspective philosophy really, you can see that in how he describes capitalism and socialism. It's all from a very Marxist point of view, and a Marxist understanding of how economics works. Yeah, exactly. It's very rare that someone likes both subjects at the same time because they are very different from each other, and they don't mesh well. Um, I've just always liked the math and numbers and stuff and complex systems. And because I like complex systems, an economy is an extremely complex system. Politics is an extremely complex system. And philosophers love coming up with complex ethical systems. Like, it is so much fun to talk ethics and to talk different ethical systems and deal with ethical ethical paradoxes and conundrums and problems and stuff. It's so much fun. And that's one of the reasons I love philosophy, is because they're really tackling big questions, and they're so big and so complex, and philosophers nitpick on the smallest things in someone's systems to test them. And that's one of the great things about it, is for a lot of philosophers, um, they don't actually get upset if you disagree with them. They love it when you disagree with them because it gives them a way to challenge their ideas, that their ideas are going to be challenged, they can defend them, and they can nitpick your ideas and test them. And it's all about testing the ideas and seeing where they fall apart and what weaknesses they have, and to think about them later on and constantly be improving yourself in your ideas.
Because the more powerful you are as a business owner, as a capitalist, the more likely it is that your mere existence, that your power distorts reality around it. If you're powerful enough, you don't even need to do anything to further capitalism. Mere existence of your industry promotes and bolsters economic structures that you might disagree with. But if you just open like a hardware store, I don't think that does. I think that you're, if anything, you're doing a good thing in that case. You don't have the power to direct the entirety of the market or meaningfully contribute harm to the world, which is good.
You know what? Have a good night. No, it's not picking up. And thank you for the follow, and have a good night. If you see me on, feel free to drop by. I'll answer any of your questions regarding politics, philosophy, or even economics. I actually do keep up with some United Kingdom, some UK politics. So if you ever want to talk UK politics, I might not be as good as with United States politics, but I definitely know some of the issues you guys are facing and some of the stuff going on there. So
This in the UK?
have a good night and get some rest, man.
Yeah, you got your face swallowed.
But maybe people in that town wanted hardware, and
There you
I mean, it's just people get excited when a new store opens in their area. It doesn't mean the system's good, but like as long as we have this system,
Yeah. So what you'd say is that ultimately, like you're responsible, but would you not say that you're responsible for your actions within the system in the way that it perpetuates? So, like, for example, if I was to, not only, hire someone, but then expect grueling hours from them and treat them harshly, like in the way that they do with Amazon, like worker exploitation in Amazon, like very high quotas, like low breaks, like absolute exploitation.
Yeah, I would agree that one ought not do that. I would say that's a moral negative. I
Okay.
don't know how exactly you would quantify the line, but I would say that if you're engaged in exploitative business practices, not like exploitative in the surplus value sense, I mean exploitative in the more traditional sense. If you're engaging in those types of practices, or if you're engaging in behavior or paying wages that puts you like below par for what's expected in your area, then I think that would be a moral wrong on its own,
Okay.
because in that case you may be providing jobs to that area, but the jobs you're providing, you're making the choice to make them worse than what they could be otherwise if they went to other places in that location.
Okay, but then if we were talking like obviously Amazon CEOs one, like let's say if we were to say like landlords, you said that that's like
Mhm.
necessary. Like one, I would disagree with that. Like absolute.
I essentially just asked why you got off.
What was that?
Why'd you get off?
I didn't get off. I'm not. I'm still streaming.
Oh, the guy left.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hey, it's in the UK. It's 4:30 in the morning his
Holy
time.
mother of all. That poor guy.
Okay. So here they were talking about hardware producing jobs. I do agree with Perspective Philosophy that Vaush's position is inconsistent. But that's not uncommon for people that have inconsistent ethical beliefs, right? We have them all the time, or what appear to be inconsistent.
Yes, but that will be.
So,
Okay, good to know, I guess, even though I won't be here most of the day.
so I definitely
I
think
can't keep yelling, Mom. Huh? I said I can't keep yelling. I came back.
And I think social housing, for example, is a viable alternative. And so if I was to disagree with being a
Can you
landlord,
describe social housing?
so like in Britain we have council housing, like as in like government owned housing, which is given to tenants, in which
Mhm.
they are the guardians of the house. They are given like essentially more freedom over the house, and they pay lower rent in relation to like the costs of living.
yeah, once we know there's council taxes. We talked about that as you got to lease both yourself at um and not only yourself but also your your property, your land. So people don't own their houses in the UK. The government owns them, and you lease them from the government. Same thing here in the United States. You pay property tax almost everywhere. You pay property tax, and guess what? Property tax is just rent that the government has for you using the property, for using the land that they own. You don't own it, you don't pay the taxes, they take your property. Fun stuff, right? Um, it's funny how he says you have more freedom, with this government housing, than his day. Still don't own it. Like, no one owns anything in the UK. Technically, since there's a person tax with this council tax, where they said that it's part property tax, part personal tax. You have to lease yourself from the UK government. Like you pay rent on yourself. Like like make that thing, like, let that sink in. Like, they have a personal tax. You get taxed for existing inside of the UK. I mean, I think that's pretty horrible that the UK government owns people, essentially, and forces them to pay rent to be free. right? I mean, that's horrible. They want to talk about wage slavery right there. What about, like, well, that's pretty bad, in my opinion. Luckily, we're here in the United States. We don't have any personal tax. You don't get taxed for existing. But you get taxed to work. So the government leases you your job. You get taxed to have property. So you get the government allows you to use rent property. The government taxes a lot of sales tax in different places, which is the government allowing making you pay a fee to have economic commerce. So, I mean, almost everything is taxed here. We do not live in a capitalist society where you are free from state intervention in the economy in every level, pretty much. Nowhere's a capitalist society. What like Perspective Philosophy and Vaush want is capitalism. They don't want socialism. They want private individuals to own their own things, right? Well, there are no private individuals that own anything. Even landlords in the United States do not own their property that they rent out. They pay taxes. They sublease it to the tenants from the government. Basically, what being a landlord is subleasing property.
So it's essentially government owned housing, right? Like state funded, right? Or state owned.
I did clarify this in my conversation with Destiny.
UK
Right now,
government
for the most
owns
part,
all
there's
property.
basically just homeowners and people who rent out land. That's basically it. America
There are
doesn't
only
have much in the way of
renters,
social
pretty much, in the
housing or
United
communal
States.
housing or anything to that effect.
You either rent
But
from the government
if
or
you
rent
wanted
from
to become a
landlord.
landlord, and in doing so you were preventing the development of that kind of communal housing, then I think that would be a moral wrong.
But is that
In
not
most
what
parts of
landlords
America,
do? Is that not what landlords always do? Because, like, if you look at it like this, if individuals weren't engaged in the process of becoming landlords, and we were to universalize that, like, if we talk about, like, obviously moral systems, as you do, the
what do you
reality.
mean not engaged in the process of becoming landlords?
So what a landlord is someone who commodifies shelter and then rents it out at a certain rate, right? Now that is
But what do we do to get rid of that? Like now, like as an individual,
Well,
what do you?
I would say that one, not becoming a landlord would be a great start, in which case you don't enter the capitalist class and then actively politically advocate against landlords existing, which would be like becoming a socialist and moving towards social social schemes which propagate like individual property ownership and government
Can't you be
ownership.
a landlord and do that?
You could be a landlord and do that, but then I was
And so right here, individual property ownership. If you're paying property taxes, you do not own the land. Government can take it from you as soon as you stop paying that property tax. So it's all government owned. If you have a landlord, the landlord has to lease his property from the government. If he doesn't lease it from the government, he doesn't pay his property tax, the government will seize his land. They'll also kick you out. So, like, if you advocate for private ownership of property, you shouldn't be advocating for government ownership of property. They work directly against each other. And that's a contradiction in the economic political sense, right? Like, something is either publicly owned or privately owned. And one is going to feed off of the publicly owned stuff is going to feed off of the privately. It's just how it is.
I would say that you're contradicting your own interests. So like
Sure. I mean, Engels did, didn't he?
Well,
But if a socialist were to become a member of the bourgeois, I would expect them to counteract their own interests.
but what I'm
That
saying
would be
is
my expectation.
what I would expect is in terms of a master-slave dialectic, that the slave's job in the dialectic is to equalize their relationship by seizing power, whilst the master's job is to diminish their power and give it back to the slave. So in terms of like the being a landlord, I would say it's an inherently exploitative relationship, and that needs to be abolished. And now if you are a landlord and you could choose not to become one, or like
Okay. So, on what about the dialectic? This is perspective philosophy. Does know a lot of his Hegelian, loves his Hegelian dialectic. So, he views the landlord-tenant, landlord-renter relationship as inherently exploitative. Um, Someone owns a house and you get to live on there as when you pay them money. The landlord is exploiting you, extracting your labor while not doing anything. Or at least that's how the argument goes. Um, Being a landlord is a job. When you're a landlord, you're expected to maintain the property. Do that either through hiring people, thus giving money to people to do labor, and contract them. So you discuss a thing, a payment structure for them to do the job. So that's extracting value or extracting labor, because this is a labor. He runs off of a labor theory of value. So when a landlord pays somebody to do something, payment is basically in terms of labor work. So when a landlord pays, he's performing labor. If he does it himself, he's performing labor. If he pays someone to do it, um, he has to get that money from some sort of labor. And now it could be that he's getting that money from the tenant himself. But there's also another thing inside of this, which is he had to develop labor. The landlord had to put labor into the property to make it rentable, either by working and doing labor in order to buy the property. Therefore, it is his labor. The home is his labor that you are then paying to use his labor. Okay, so you're giving money to him, which is currency is labor to a Marxist. So when you hand dollars over, you're handing your labor over to compensate the landlord for the labor he put into the property to own it. Whether that is money he earned through working himself. So becoming a landlord is not even in his mind, even in the Hegelian thing, would not Marxist terminology of labor theory of value. It's not inherently exploitable, even though they say it is. And that's because they don't look past the individual relationship. They only do one step. So one step in the economic exchange is landlord takes money for you living in a house. That's his. So he owns the house, and you pay him money, which is your labor, to live there. And the landlord does nothing. Or at least that's the theory is. The landlord does not do labor to earn that money. But what the landlord did was the landlord did labor to own that house. You are now using that house, depriving him of his own labor. So if you look one step deeper, and therefore the landlord, when you live in someone else's house and you don't pay them anything, you are stealing labor from the landlord. You can work it just like that, just by going one step further down and recognizing that the house is a store of labor value, kind of like currency supposedly is. but they don't believe in any sort of private property. So they want it all controlled by the state. You have no private property because the government owns it all, or the state owns it all, or the public owns it all to a socialist.
Like you want a
Well, then
landlord rather, and you choose not to
how do
become
you
one,
rent then?
well then you could obviously, like what I'm saying is that in which case we're going to have a deficit in which this is going to need to be filled. The government is either going to step in or the housing market will collapse. And so the government will step in. And if the government doesn't step in, then the housing market collapse. But we're basically creating a level of political power which forces the government's hand, or we're not.
Well, that would what you're describing would cause an unimaginable amount of suffering to average people. We people need to very few people right now can buy a home. If that was the only thing people were capable of doing, we would we would see a precipitous rise in homelessness. The way our system works right now requires the existence of landlords or some system to allow temporary housing. But if you want a top-down social push, that's fine. But I don't think that like not renting out your property makes the government more likely to engage in housing reform.
No, well, like, look, if you've already got the property, then you're already responsible for it. That's different. Like, then I would say that your responsibilities are different. You could rent it out at cost, for example, and then in which case you're essentially you're not enriching yourself upon the backs of another, right? So like that would be a separate like moral take. But in terms of like your responsibility in the perpetuation and like consolidation of more and more properties, I would say that ultimately, if you are consolidating properties, commodifying it, and then exploiting individuals who rent them by charging the the neutral amount, as you say, like the market value in which the rent is done, I would say that you are doing the wrong thing. It's not that you are doing merely a moral neutral thing. You are precipitating the harm of the system, which and the system itself is morally deficit. So, in other
Well,
words,
the system will continue to exist.
So in this thing, I agree with Perspective Philosophy's critique of Vaush's moral stance here. He's right. There is a contradiction here. If you believe that capitalist system is wrong, you want to see the change, and that the current system is crap and morally unethical, then perpetuating that system or actively participating in that system in any way is morally wrong, not morally neutral. You don't get a free pass just because that's how things are. We didn't let the Nazis off with the excuse I was just following orders. So ethically and morally, you don't get to be excused from doing something that's wrong just because it's the system around you. You need to take a stand. And I agree with Perspective Philosophy on this. No matter how much it would hurt, how much suffering it would cause to you personally or to those around you, you have a moral and ethical obligation to disrupt unethical behavior. You just don't participate in it at all.
Exist whether or not you so hold on, there's one thing there that you said that I do agree with. The act of ruthlessly buying up properties and engaging in real estate acquisitions to form a rent market to become a little slumlord, of course I think that's a negative thing. I think that's a distinctly negative action. It's a bad thing to do, socialist or otherwise. But if you just have a property and you want to rent it out and you just rent it out at standard fare, I consider that a morally neutral action. It's something that would have had to have happened anyway
why
because
would
the system
standard
relies.
fare be a morally neutral action? Why would that not be morally deficit in the same way that you would be engaging in the system, which is morally deficit? So if you're responsible for your power
I
in
don't
the
think
system,
engaging in the system is morally deficit.
well, you said that we have our in relation to the power of the system, our moral culpability is relation to in proportion to the relationship in which we have power, right? Like our responsibility is directly in relation to power. So if we are capable of, lowering rent, so by undercutting the market, we can actively affect rent prices in that sector. So why aren't we doing it if we are charging the minimum? If we are charging the standard, all we are doing
You
is
should do it.
perpetuating that
I'm
standard.
gonna
Exactly. So I would say that you are doing
listen to
the wrong
this
thing if
when
you
I
are
have
charging the
something on
standard,
a
not
pod.
that you are simply doing the morally neutral thing.
Oh, well, then at this point, we're just arriving at irreconcilable differences in where we place the threshold for morally obligatory behavior. I think that it would be a neutral thing to take properties that you already have and rent them out at the rate which is considered a fair market rate. I think that if you're a socialist, you should do better than that. You should rent it out at cost, or at least closer to cost. But I don't think it makes you a bad person to engage in the standard of fare. I don't think you're contributing negatively to
I'm gonna
the
cut the
utility in the
audio on
world,
this.
because if you hadn't done that, if you just owned this property and didn't rent it out, then it would just be an empty property. If anything, you'd be contributing positively to utility by adding another house on the market for people to rent, because you would be providing more opportunity in areas that might be difficult to get a house in.
But how could you say that you're not doing the wrong thing if you're actively engaging in the standard affair when socialism is an active rejection of the status quo and the propagation of a political shift? If you're a landlord who actively precipitates the status quo, and that is, you know, the ever rising rent prices and costs of living, then you should actively seek to subvert that by understanding your political responsibility as a landlord in reference to your power within the market, should you not?
Yeah, you should do it. But if that's the case, your problem isn't with landlords. It's with landlords behaving irresponsibly. Would you have a problem with a socialist, a wealthy one, engaging in a ruthless acquisition of properties to form a slumlord empire and then charging everyone at cost? Would that be moral to you?
Um, what if someone was to, like, let's say, use it depends obviously in relation to, like, one, I'm not a utilitarian, so I'm not going to just look at the consequences and see if I can justify everything. I'm going to look at, like, essentially moral reasons, and I think that's what we need to do more, because I think at the end of the day, like, engaging in right reason, regardless of whether we are deontologists or utilitarians, is the only way that we can gain some level of ethical truth in relation to how we are behaving as being right or not. So at the end of the day, what I would like to see is whether the individual was using right reasons in determining whether they were actually creating a quote unquote better society, and whether this would create a better society. So if we universalize this behavior, what would be the result? In relation to the slumlord, um,
I strongly disagree with the premises with which you're coming at this, by the way. I don't buy into the categorical imperative.
oh
I
well,
don't think we judge the moral worth of actions based on the universalization of those actions.
well, it's not about the universalization of those actions in just in terms of a categorical imperative. It's about the right reason in relation to those actions, which is even if it's utilitarian or not. Like, so, for example, I'm not a deontologist. Absolutely, I'm a Hegelian, so that means that I'm actually a combination of deontology and consequentialism. Probably
Imagine
easiest.
unironically being a Hegelian after Marx owned you guys. Oof.
Ooh, but even Zizek's a Hegelian, and, like, any real base takes is understanding that like, ideology is fundamentally expresses what material is in the first place. That
Yeah, no, Hegel, Hegelian philosophy, it's a headache. Um, it's fun. But I mean, Hegel's dialectic makes a lot of sense. His ethics makes some sense. I I agree with. This is rough. So I agree with. I like the dialectic approach to things. But at the end of the day, I just. There's just a realist in me that says the world works a certain way. And we should work inside of the world to bring about the best results. Because I have a kind of mixed ethical thing as well, where it's not just it's not just it's just not it's not utilitarian all the way through, and um it's not categorical all the way through. I believe in I have a hierarchical categorical ethical system. So I believe there are strong ethical categories like rules, um, like don't hurt people, but hard rules, right? And then there are also those hard values. Those hard values are then set up in a hierarchy to determine how we resolve ethical conundrums. So, take for example the trolley problem. This is a very common ethical problem. The trolley problem is there's a train running down the tracks. You're standing by the switch that flips the tracks. There are 5 people on the track that the train's currently going down, and it'll kill 5 people if you don't do anything. If you pull the lever, one person will get killed by the train instead. Nothing you do to save the people. You have to make a choice, flip the switch or not. So do you let 5 people die, or do you flip the switch and kill someone else? So you take most ethical systems, and most ethical systems run into this problem of, like, the utilitarians say you always switch it. Because 5 lives are worth more than 1. A moral absolutist says you don't do anything. You let the 5 people die, because if you flip the switch, you are causing the death of that other person. And you are not causing the death of the 5 people. Whoever set them up on the train tracks is causing their death. So you wouldn't flip the switch. And my thing is, my belief, my ethical system is that it depends on where your values are. Some people are going to value human life over personal responsibility. So you being personally responsible does not matter as much as life. So you'll flip the switch and you'll save 5 lives at the cost of the 1. Because that maximizes your hierarchical value of human life. Personal responsibility, if that's a higher thing, where you hold what you personally do at higher regard than human life. So at that point, your actions matter more than life itself. Good night, love.
Also, bye.
It's almost time for me to get off. So what'll happen is you won't flip the switch with the 5 people die, because you being responsible for that one person's death matters more than human life in general. And this is how ethics, I think, works in the human condition. Not how it necessarily ought to work, but how it actually works. What was that, Sarah?
I said that's Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Put the switch and pull point and get out of the way.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's why I'm not politics.
No, the trolley problem is that you can't get the other person out of the way. You can't save anybody on the track.
Well, you can't save them. They said it's not true.
No, they're tied up and laid on the tracks. You
Well,
can't
I'm gonna
reach
tie
them.
them up,
Some douchebag.
obviously.
But do you let the 5 people die, or do you flip the switch and let one person die?
Flip the switch.
Okay, so you're responsible for that person's death.
I'd rather be responsible for one person's death than that 5 people die, because in my mind, I'm responsible for their deaths. Because I could have predicted the deaths of the others.
See, she values human life above what would be considered personal.
And I mean, I'm gonna have to live with that regret all my life, and whatever.
Okay, so
And
you see,
He's back and I went to the tracks and killed him.
so there you go.
Did I get it right?
There's no right or wrong answer to the trolley problem.
I'll sit with myself. But have a got it.
So-
Get ready. Let me go happy black. It tastes good, so we did.
Making sure I get my vitamins. So,
So good question.
mhm,
If there's someone else watching you,
mm.
Oh.
I'm just finishing this video here.
so you're listening to the video and responding in minutes.
It's a video review.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna-
don't like the trolley problem. I like my solution. Hope boy can like go all his way and go.
Oh, okay. So, better yet, here's the alternate to the trolley problem.
Probably. If that person who will let one person die.
Oh, let's see how far you'll take it. So my wife says she'll flip the switch.
Yeah.
This is the second part to the trolley problem that no one ever asks anybody at dinner parties because it's very impolite. But we're going to ask it here. So we're going to take that to the next step. Now instead, you're over a bridge. Okay? And there's a train coming down the track. And there's 5 people tied up on the track below you. And there's a fat guy, like a really fat guy, hanging over the bridge. And you know for a fact, that if you push the guy off the bridge, he'll be able to stop the train and save those 5 guys' lives. But he'll die.
Wait, how far is he?
Doesn't matter. He's fat enough to stop the train.
That's like impossible.
No. This is the
okay,
fun thing
okay.
about trolley problem. The
I'm listening.
philosophical hypotheticals is because you could make the guys fat enough to stop a train barreling down the road. Okay, so do you push the fat guy off the road, off the bridge, to fall to his death and stop the train,
Yeah.
or do you let the 5 people die?
No, you push the back.
Wow, see, I'm kind of proud of you how determined you are with this. Most people, when you ask the second part of the trolley problem with the fat guy over the bridge, most people won't actually push the fat guy off the bridge.
I mean, there's no time to talk him into jumping, so
Yeah, it's no,
his life is probably full of pain anyways if he's that.
no, he has a good life. He has a wonderful life.
You can't be that bad. Have a wonderful
No, he has a
life.
wonderful life. He has this special technology that lets him walk around and enjoy life like normal people.
It's not that I don't love you. I love you too, but
5 lives over 1, right?
I'll go Jones through my kids time. It's fine.
I'm proud of you for sticking to your guns on that. Most people won't stick to their guns when you bring up the second bit.
Oh no, you know how I am. I double down. I triple down, man.
Most
Okay.
people back out of the second part of the problem. They'll let the 5 die in the second part of the problem.
I mean, I guess it depends if I have enough fish to touch the train.
Could I actually push some of that? Yeah, he's leaning over pretty far.
I'm just running
Just-
to him and
Just a little tap actually will just send him
oh,
toppling.
that's
'cause
fine. That's fine. That's not unfair. Just like, you're like, I have no idea what happened. That guy fell.
Okay.
Peace.
We'll continue this.
That materialism can't explain what the foundations of the dialectic in any ways. So
All right,
unless
okay.
so
Well, get to answering my question now. We're getting too deep. I'm not a philosopher.
yeah,
I can only engage with it on a
I was gonna
surface
say
level.
I was gonna say unless you want to start debating on something to do with idealism and materialism, then we're gonna go like on a sharp sideways tangent, right? But like at the end of the day, right? Like what I'm saying is right reason is fundamental to all ethical discourse. Now, one of the things I hear you say all the time is essentially like you're a pre-supper in relation to ethics. Now, one that I don't
I'm a
even
what?
think presuppositionalist. Someone who believes that they can assume what is or state a moral axiom from which they are attempting to maximize, that they get to choose the foundations of their moral system. Am I
You mean
wrong?
like I get to decide the axiomatic beliefs that I believe society should be directed towards fulfilling?
So like you get it. It's not like not necessarily the axiomatic, but it's like first like when we talk about axioms, like we would be like so like foundational first principles. Where would you derive them in terms of ethics?
So like axiomatic beliefs. I just want to make sure we're using the same term. First principles are axiomatic beliefs, right?
What
Properly basic beliefs.
Well, yeah, I would say that where we derive our first principles would either be
Oh, I
necessity.
arrive at them purely through subjective preference.
Okay, through subjective preference. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you now is how do you know what your preference is?
Well, I think that a preference is a cognitive process. So whatever preference I arrive at must necessarily be
Hmm.
the one which I adopt.
Have you ever encountered what's called the Frege-Geach embedding problem?
We are very far beyond my realm of expertise here. No, I have not.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. The Frege-Geach embedding problem is essentially a take that's built upon what's called Wittgensteinian language games, in which we understand that language can only exist in a common domain, right? That private language cannot exist. And so when I talk about something that is private, I sorry, that I cannot speak about that which is private, but more so that in relation to argumentation, if I am talking and referencing something that is private, I can't know what I am talking about except from my current interpretation of it. So if I say, this is a chair, and that.
Okay. I understand what he's talking about. Or at least I've read about what he's talking about. The important thing here, and he's using, I like to think of it really simply. You know what? I should let him explain it. He is the PhD student after all. He's going to be teaching this stuff, and so he probably knows better than me, because I'm just a small undergrad degree here, not a postgraduate degree in philosophy. So he's probably got a better explanation. Let me hear it, and I might try to break it down further if I feel like he used too many. Philosophers are notorious at this, but we use a private language all the time. There are we use terms all the time in non-standard means. Philosophers are notorious for this. Um, we have special definitions for words, everything. And so, unless you're talking to someone who studied philosophy to know the definitions, you're talking past them. Most people won't understand it unless you explain the definitions, which is why philosophers get into this thing of explaining. We explain everything because we know we use this. And we actually have a theory that talks about how you can't debate it unless you're all on the same page and are using the same language. It's a philosophy of language type thing. So let's hear his explanation.
That is a table, and what I'm referencing is a purely private object, quote unquote, and not something common, then I go back, I'll have no way to know whether I'm interpreting it the same way as I did before. And so the standard
Okay,
is
I agree with
always my
that.
interpretation. Yeah. So
But if we wheel it back a little bit, what does this have to do with you answering my devastating question?
okay, like sorry, wait, do you want, like what I was trying to say is in terms of like first principles, and you said like, look, you don't like where we're wheeling it back to, because you made a point about essentially like I don't agree with the way that you're approaching things in terms of the categorical imperative, and then I started
Well,
talking about right
I
reason.
asked you, would it be moral for a ruthlessly capitalistic socialist to invest and spave up a bunch
Mm.
of money and then buy a bunch of properties and get a little rentier empire, but then to to rent out those properties at cost, or maybe just a little bit above at cost? Would that be unethical?
Well, what I was going to say is that my ability to answer that question is dependent upon like reason itself and our engagement in it as a community. So like this is why I'm a deontologist, at least to some degree, because I understand that even an expression of the consequences depends upon my engagement within a structure of argumentation which exists between agents. We talk about whether the consequences actually would be better or not than the you know the means in which I come to them, and whether if people engage in this systemic, you know, in this moral system, whether it will ultimately maximize the consequences or not. So even if you're a consequentialist, you have to do that, and that's what I was trying to express, and that it has to be in between agents. If you're asking me personally, on like intuitionally, right now, what do I think? Would a slumlord who you know maximizes his own personal gain ultimately to only create a socialist, well, not a socialist, it would be like a more socially like valuable like scenario. I would say that there are like two kind of caveats to this. If he uses means in which we say is justified in relation to creating a certain moral end, would those means ultimately produce more harm than good? Like what institution is he engaged in and maximizing? If it's the being a landlord, then ultimately he is going to be causing the exact same harm that he is then trying to solve. So he's basically stealing a wallet and then give it like
Yeah.
Hey, guinea pig.
Hey.
How long are you going to be up?
For a little bit. Why?
Like another 20 minutes?
Sure. Oh, great. I'm getting a tattoo, people. A temporary tattoo. My wife bought a temporary tattoo kit.
It's called henna tattoos.
Henna tattoos. I have no idea what
I'm
they
sure
are.
someone out there knows what it is. If you want me to use this pencil, tell me.
What stencils do you have?
Eh?
Oh, this opens up like this.
Here's these ones too. Oh my gosh, those are terrible. Spider.
No.
Black. I'll do a little red.
No,
like
no, no.
triangle
Do the
on it.
little Joker.
Wait, where's that?
Like Jester head.
Oh, Jester. That's Medusa, dude.
Oh, that's Medusa. Sorry.
Actually, it might be a Joker. Let's just do it.
No, 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 no. Do this one then.
Why?
This is a
that like
try
a
knot.
camera thing?
No, that's just a try knot. That's
I don't
a
know
cool
what the
thing.
flip
Oh
is.
no! Fairy tale. Oh, I gotta have that.
Jinx.
They have a fairy tale stencil for the set she got, and I am totally getting a fairy
What
tale.
color is it
tattoo.
usually?
It's all different colors, but you can do red. This is gonna be epic. I'm so excited for this one.
Just do plain red?
Yeah, just plain red.
I've been so excited for this to come. So.
I'm so excited for this. I didn't know we had a little fairy tale line. That's freaking epic.
As soon as you pointed it out, I knew exactly what it was.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna put a pot thing on my dad.
So, pretty cool. Oh, wait. Well, maybe I should do black. No, no, no. The red would work. Just pure red.
You want red and black?
No, no, no. We're doing pure red. Okay.
Oh, it's coming down faster than I thought it would. Hold on. Oh my gosh, that's like bloodshed. Oh,
like, you know, taking $100 and giving $5 back. He's producing the problem that he's trying to solve through philanthropy. If he's essentially doing it in relation to another industry,
Doesn't
then he's
feel
creating
right,
another
though.
level of harm, which we need to
Stop
weigh
looking.
against the good that he's
You
producing.
moving is gonna
And now
mess
these
this
are the
up.
kind of questions that I think we need to engage in. But ultimately, if we can undermine, like, so for example, the whole problems causing system, then that's what we should do. Not cause the problem rather than try to like solve problems through redistribution. I mean, hell, that's the difference between liberalism and socialism in the first place, right? We don't try to, apologize for capitalism. We try to subvert it.
No.
No, so you would say that we apologize.
I've always been told, tattoos hurt.
So liberalism. I'm very disappointed in Perspective Philosophy for us doing this. He's using the colloquial instead of the political, philosophical liberalism. And then he's, so this is very subtle. And the only people who are going to catch this are the people who know the definitions and how he is switching definitions mid-sentence. So I think this is very how should I say? No, it's dishonest on his part. I don't know if he's doing this on purpose, but he should know. He should know what he's talking about as a PhD philosophy student. He should know when you're talking about liberalism.
I'm not going to my mom a tattoo. Leave down for 30 minutes. I want my stencil back.
Okay. When he's talking for this for liberalism, he should know the different variations of the definition and what they mean, and that he is switching definitions mid-sentence. So, liberalism as a philosophical idea
Love you. Don't be allergic to it.
is that of personal liberty. A philosophical liberal, okay, would maximize personal liberty. That was the original idea of liberalism, was liberty. Founding fathers were liberals in the classical sense. That doesn't mean they're against government. They're not. They believe in some sort of government, and they just believe in maximizing the liberty of the individual. He talks about this definition. If I go back just a little bit, see if I can spot. I'll spot the definition to the hears.
Valuable like scenario. I would say
We're gonna
that
go
there are
back here
like
and
two
listen to
kind of
this.
caveats to this. If he uses means in which we say is justified in relation to creating a certain moral end, would those means ultimately produce more harm than good? Like, what institution is he engaged in and maximizing? If it's the being a landlord, then ultimately he is going to be causing the exact same harm that he is then trying to solve. So he's basically stealing a wallet and then taking $100 and giving $5 back. He's producing the problem that he's trying to solve through philanthropy. If he's essentially doing it in relation to another industry, then he's creating another level of harm, which we need to weigh against the good that he's producing. And now these are the kind of questions that I think we need to engage in. But ultimately, if we can undermine, like, so for example, the whole problems causing system, then that's what we should do. Not cause the problem rather than try to like solve problems through redistribution. I mean, hell, that's the difference between liberalism and socialism in the first place.
Okay. Liberalism and socialism in the first place. He uses liberalism here in the traditional philosophical stance. Liberalism is against socialism because they want private choice, private individuals making the choices, and to maximize that freedom. And socialists don't want to maximize individual choice and production. Socialism is about public control, public determining means of production and owning the means of production. And that eliminates the private individual or severely limits the private individual. Now, here, that's what he means in this sense. He's talking about liberalism in the classical sense. So, liberalism in the sense of personal liberty, private choice, private property. John Locke, John Locke was a liberal, and I mean he life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. This is three things. Like Thomas Jefferson totally ripped that off, but changed property to happiness. Okay. Pursuit of property. So that's a liberal position. Private property is very important. Socialists, you don't want private property. They want it state controlled or publicly owned. But then watch how he switches it here.
Place, right? We don't try to, apologize for capitalism. We try to subvert it.
All right. He then switches the definition here. Now he's talking about liberals in the colloquial sense, as in Democrats or various different political parties that use the term liberal in the modern sense. They are socialists. They like state control. They just don't like it to the same extent as other socialists. They're much more about personal power that they can gain through state control than supposedly redistributing it to the public at large. But it's still state control, public control. They use public control as a means to enrich themselves. And this is what he's talking about here. It's a clever switch. Most people won't notice the switch. I'm pointing out the switch. It's two different definitions. They're not the same. John Locke would be against the Democratic Party today in the United States. Because they're very much against, they wish to limit some personal liberties. Just to be clear, John Locke would also be against the Republican Party. Like, both parties would not be up his alley. He would consider both of them to be corrupt, horrible statist institutions that are crushing the personal liberties of the individual. But that being said, he is switching the definition, whether he realizes it or not. I'm not sure that he realizes it. Like, he says it with such a straight face. But he is switching the definitions. And this is more my alley, right? Like, he focuses on ethics a lot. Like, from what I've heard of Perspective Philosophy, he is very much an ethicist. He studies ethics. That's his shtick. It feels fine. I don't know how it's coming at all. I haven't even looked at it or moved. So, he might be using switching definitions mid-sentence without even realizing it, and not doing it maliciously. But he should know the philosophies behind there and what the definitions are, and that he's changing definitions there mid-sentence.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
I'm your biggest fan.
No.
Oh, cool.
No, so you would say that we apologize for capitalism.
Oh my God,
No, I would say that individual actions don't have much to do with institutional reform in this regard. I don't think that a person's decision to go ahead and buy up a bunch of properties and then price them all, or rent them all out at cost, I don't think that like
Yeah, that's not right. You're gonna have to
bolsters the commodification of housing. I just don't see that happening.
No.
I guess if you got
Oh my
large
God, so
enough
like
to a point where
automatic
you were like
mistake.
lobbying for
Oh, that was scary.
a lack of housing laws or changing zoning laws or stuff like that, then that would
So
be
you
the
just
case.
wanna
But
stay up?
I think
Do I
that just
wipe it off
on
after?
its
Like,
face, the
No,
act
just
that I
stay up and
described
wait
would
for
be
it to dry.
good
It's
because
fine.
before people, if they want to rent in
okay,
that
but here's the
town, they
next
got to
step
pay
then. Let's stick
2,000 a
it to the
month,
do
and
something if you're not
now they can just pay
stick with it.
1,000 or
But then,
1,500
obviously,
or
like even
something.
in terms of the
Like, what am I
consequences,
sticking?
the actions in which he has taken will have consequences on the lives of other individuals. And
Like
obviously, if
who?
we well, like what has he done to accumulate the wealth, which has allowed him to own the property, which has allowed him to, to do this? You said that he's using unscrupulous
I am
business
so
methods.
sorry.
Okay,
And he's
well,
like a
we're
super
just talking
capitalist.
about landlording now, so let's not obfuscate
Yeah,
by
no, it's
talking
fine.
about how
I'll
he
just
got the
wait.
money. But
But
let's just say he got really lucky in a couple of
it's your
trades.
example. Like
Okay, well then he got his initial money by getting really lucky with a couple of trades. He participated in the GME
I'm so
fiasco,
sorry.
right, he
and
won the lottery.
I
He won
was
the
so
lottery.
20 minutes.
yeah, okay,
I
he
was
won the
misled.
lottery, and he decided, fuck
What
it,
was
I'm
that?
gonna lower the
Also
rent
20
for everyone in
minutes.
town. I'm gonna
Okay.
I was
build
misled.
an empire,
Well,
and I'm going to price everyone at cost.
but
Just
then
in
that
case
that
you did.
only bolsters
Have
what my
philosophy
point
going.
was in relation to personal responsibility in relation to the market, in which I said that look, abiding by the status quo would be morally wrong.
So you can
He's
stick
actually
with this
actively trying to
pencil
subvert
tool.
that market. He's
Oh,
trying
okay.
to
So you
lower
do
the.
think it would be good?
It would be good if he was engaged in essentially undermining the current status quo within the capitalist market. But then I'd say he's a socialist in capitalism. Like he's not a capitalist anymore.
Well, sure. I mean, capitalist in the sense that he owns capital. But yeah, okay. So if you think that's positive, and I think that's positive, and I think that's lovely, actually, what if you just have a big old apartment building filled with 40 apartments? They're all rented. And then guy wins the lottery, and he thinks, you know, housing's a safe bet. And he buys that whole apartment block. Now the 40 rents go to him. He doesn't change a dime, but he doesn't add to or decrease the total number of people who rent, doesn't add
And you
to or
took off.
decrease
Now.
the total amount of social or economic capital
Well,
invested
now.
in
My phone?
landlording.
Yes.
He
Do you
maintains the
think that
status
is a
quo.
morally negative action?
Yes.
How so?
It's morally negative because he understands. I'm
Not the
assuming that
red
we're talking
one.
about someone who
You
understands some
might
sort
not
of
like
ethical
my phone.
discourse, so that he has some sort of ethical decision making,
Okay.
criteria. I'd say that if he understands socialism, then he understands that the status quo is currently exploitative, and so he would be perpetuating the continuation of that exploitation.
How is he perpetuating it? It was
because-
happening anyway.
Because he has now got the power to subvert it. His responsibility is
happening
directly
anyway.
but you just said that he's
The net
responsible.
utility hasn't
Oh,
the net
sorry.
utility hasn't decreased.
But his power to modify the utility has. That's an individual's responsibility, is it not?
I mean, it's good if they do that thing. I don't necessarily think that if a person is a socialist, they're responsible to do more. I think anybody should be expected to do more, but I don't think that's a component
But
of being a socialist.
it's not about him being a socialist as being responsible to do more. It's that he's a socialist that he knows that we are responsible to do. If we have the power, we are more responsible than we have been, as in we are being irresponsible when we are capitalists, and that is wrong and bad for people to exist in capitalism. And so as a socialist, he understands that he should try to subvert the current system, to lower rent prices, to do the right thing in order to maximize the utility of the general populace, right? So being a socialist just makes him aware of his moral responsibilities. The capitalist is doing the wrong thing because capitalism is wrong and they are perpetuating that system. But being a socialist, if you are given the power of a capitalist, you should seek to subvert the system by doing what is right.
Sure, I mean, you can say that, but I can never say that an action is morally negative if it doesn't decrease the total utility in the world. Now, you could argue that a socialist would, could expect more from them, and I think I would agree with that because I've said that to people in my community. They say, Vaush, I'm a landlord. Vaush, it just came into some money, et cetera, et cetera. You try to give them good takes, but that's not me saying that this is now morally obligatory behavior, because to do so would be to suggest that I would impugn a person for engaging in an action which carries no negative utility, which would be a disruption of what I believe.
That's not true. One, there is definitely a utilitarian take in this in relation to principles, as principles themselves hold utility, and so the perpetuation of principles which hold people to a higher state of moral standard ultimately increase the consequential outcome. So if we were to say that socialists have a
This is a matter of advice for everyone. I feel like Vaush is getting just destroyed here. And it's not really his fault. I watch Vaush, along with Perspective Philosophy, Destiny. I watch pretty much everybody because my job allows me to watch these things, and after a while, you just listen to everybody. So, just as a word of advice, if you have not read extensively philosophy and feel like you understand it, and have tested this out by asking a philosopher if you understand this, because philosophers have their own private language and do not use the same words the same way that other people do. Or studied philosophy in college, like beyond an intro to philosophy course. Do not get into an ethics debate with a PhD student of philosophy, or a PhD of philosophy, or even someone who's getting a master's degree, or even someone with a bachelor's degree. Just don't. Like, this is the bread and butter of philosophy professors. They love to debate students. This is like their favorite pastime. They love talking about this stuff nonstop. Nonstop. Someone who's getting a PhD in philosophy likes doing this stuff non-stop. They love debating non-stop. If they are a PhD student, they have had professors who know their stuff pick apart their thinking and challenge them on everything. Okay? You do not get to state a belief in a philosophy class to a philosophy professor and have it go unchallenged. Just flat out. Doesn't happen. The philosophy professor will poke, prod, and get you to defend that belief and will make you look like a fool. Or if he doesn't make you look like a fool, he will say, good job that you are no longer looking like a fool. And this only happens like very rarely and usually with PhD students or postgraduate students, you know, who've already spent years getting their arguments destroyed and having to think about it and rearrange things and reevaluate their beliefs. I bet you, I would bet anybody, like put money on the table, that Perspective Philosophy has thought about his ethical positions and has tweaked them and changed them hundreds of times. Hundreds of times. Like, his principles might not have changed, but his arguments and his ethical reasoning has changed hundreds of times throughout his study in college. Like, hundreds. And I bet all of his professors that he has studied under has poked and prodded him on his thoughts on many different subjects. And they, in turn, the philosophy professors, have had their ideas poked and prodded for years by their colleagues, by their professors. Like, you do not debate philosophers. Just don't. Like, don't do it and expect that you're going to be... Just go in with the understanding that you are the underdog in every single argument, whether they know a lot about it or not. Because if a philosopher doesn't know a lot about it, and he still wants to win, he or she still wants to win the debate, they know enough rhetorical tricks, up their sleeves that they can still make it look like you've lost, even when they don't know a damn thing. Like, rhetorically, they can make you lose. Like, it's pretty bad. Like, philosophers know they're debating. Like that's that's like at least a third of the fun of being a philosopher and going to philosophy classes is the debates. Personally, for me, it was more than a third. I love debating. Anyone wants to debate me, go right ahead. Bring me on. Or come on. I mean, I don't care. I'll debate you on pretty much anything. And if I agree with you, just to let you know, if I agree with you, I'll say I'll agree with you, but I'll play devil's advocate. I play devil's advocate all the time. It's a great way. Playing devil's advocate is actually an extremely good way to strengthen your arguments. Knowing and having to steel man the other side is the best way to increase your ability to win debates for your side. Like, if you're scared to steel man the opposing side's arguments and actually debate with somebody who's on your side of any sort of debate, no, I mean, I would do that responsibly, of course. Like, don't go advocating and not explaining that you're playing devil's advocate in a public debate. But if you're not willing to try and steelman and are incapable of doing so, you have not studied your opponent's ideology or thoughts or philosophy enough to properly take it apart. And if they have studied your and are able to steelman your arguments, you have almost no chance, not a snowball's chance in heck, to be able to stop them in a debate without you looking like a fool or just doing ideological points. Like, not in a real debate, you wouldn't be winning. That's the thing. You got to be able to steelman your opponent's arguments. You got to be able to argue their side just as well as you can argue your beliefs. And there's nothing wrong with being able to do that. In fact, it's a good thing. Let's go ahead and get some bridges here and listen to some more of this
a higher standard than capitalists, which they do because they understand what they can do, or that individuals that have power should act upon that power, then they can overall change the standard of society. And so by telling people that they don't have a responsibility to do anything but maintain the status quo would be absolutely wrong in relation to utilitarianism, because it would negatively impact the utility.
I'm just talking about positive and negative utility. I'm not talking about responsibility. I'm more than willing to admit or to believe that socialists should be expected to do more, or that they should be responsible for more. But I still can't say that the neutral action is a moral negative if it doesn't increase negative utility in the world. If you want, I mean, maybe this is like a definition or a semantics parsing kind of thing, because I feel like we're ballparking in the same direction. I think, like, if I had a socialist friend who was a landlord, I would probably lean on them to do good with that responsibility if that was at all possible. I guess I'd do the same if it was a capitalist friend too. Well, I would expect more from a socialist, I suppose, because they would know why my arguments were prescient. But I still couldn't say that them deciding not to would be it just doesn't fit with my principles, you know? It's like it's morally neutral. It has to be if there's no negative utility.
But there would be a negative utility of someone who, like, you know, if socialists didn't engage in like higher levels of activity when they gain power, because then it would always perpetuate capitalism, and so we would never see the removal of capitalism, which would be of negative utility.
Well, that would just be that you could accrue additional positive utility by encouraging socialists to act in more responsible ways with situations like this, which I agree with. But there's a difference between we need to encourage socialists to contribute more positive utility, and socialists are engaging in negative utility when they do X.
Like,
you know,
like one.
It's a difference that means something to me.
I think we're gonna, I think we're gonna disagree on that, which is fair enough. Except, what I want to understand when we talk about, like, you know, when you say the words good, bad, right and wrong, responsibility, you know, all these morally loaded terms, what any of that means, because it seems to me that there was a point in the conversation with Destiny, and I'm not gonna lie, I got so fucking triggered like and because I'm a vegan, I want you to know that I'm a vegan. I'm 100% a
I
vegan.
know you are.
Yeah, and the reality is that I see an individual's responsibility within society as being directly proportional to their engagement within a certain market environment. So if they perpetuate that market, they are doing wrong. Like as you say, like if we make the markets bigger and we employ more wage slaves that would have otherwise not had to be employed, or we lower wages or whatever, and we actively engage in that, let's say we start we start enforcing like higher rents, we are doing something wrong, right? We are making the markets worse. It's the same thing with consumptive habits, right? We have a monetary vote, and we can, and you actually accepted this in the Destiny debate. Your argument against Destiny was that when we engage, when Southern Americans were buying slaves, they were only being bought, they were only being brought over and enslaved because there was a demand for that, right? That people were purchasing those slaves, but then numerous times.
If nobody was buying the slaves, then they wouldn't go through all the trouble of bringing them over the Atlantic,
100%,
right?
I completely agree. Same thing with animal agriculture. And that
Yeah, of course.
numerous times, every time a vegan has debated you use the words "no ethical consumption under capitalism," which is absolutely wrong and unbelievably irresponsible.
Wait, so do you think that like people are bad people because they buy clothing from corporations, or?
I think that if we can buy clothing in a way that was non-exploitative, then we ought to buy the clothing which is non-exploitative. So our
I
market.
don't think anybody lives to that standard consistently. We all engage in the petty conveniences of
But
capitalist
even
convenience.
if we agreed that individuals do wrong things, that doesn't mean that the standard doesn't exist. Like it's still a moral standard, even if everyone was doing the wrong thing. Like even if, let's say, everyone is buying iPhones when we know that we shouldn't all be buying iPhones for an environmental reason alone, like then yeah. But then look at it like this: if an individual like it acts as a wage slave, right? Like let's say like with iPhones, like the slavery that's produced to make iPhones. Like what I would say is that certain levels of technology are necessitated for normal living, at least in society today. To enter the
The problem is
market,
any conversation on this is going to be unbelievably arbitrary. Like which types of buying unethical products does more harm. I think these conversations tend to be unproductive because people are always going to be invested in defending the types of things they engage in. People who don't own cars are going to be really hard on people who do, but then people who do own cars are going to be really hard on people who, buy inorganic cleaning supplies and so on and so forth.
no,
I
but
just
like
think it leads to a lot of dick measuring.
look,
If we want to talk ultimately about like consequential harm, then you know what? I will update my terminology for your sake because I think that you're correct in this respect. Purchasing meat, I want to be clear about this. Purchasing meat, dairy, et cetera, purchasing anything under capitalism, basically, though especially animal products, contributes negative utility to the world. There is positive utility because, as much as this sounds like a cop out, eating a steak does contribute positive utility to the world because it's tasty. That is a real thing, but probably doesn't outweigh all the fucking animal torture. So there is negative utility there. That is true. However, I don't think morally impugning people for participating in these economic systems is uh, generally very effective.
really, because I think that discipline's incredibly effective, for one, and two, like, I think that what we are talking about is the implementation of certain principles which would ultimately improve the utility. So if we created certain standards from which to expect of other individuals in society and hold them to that standard, then we ultimately perpetuate the highest amount of utility.
But this is getting into a nice, fine argument on utility arguments. This debate will literally could go on forever, because utilitarians debate all the time on what is the maximum utility, what brings about the maximum utility. It's a very utilitarianism to a very large degree has a lot of problems with what's the word? Subjective claims. I mean, I guess like what utility brings about the best, most utility, and that sort of thing is can be very, very subjective. And yeah, I mean, just it can be very subjective, and that's part of the problem I have with utilitarianism. Is that once you start talking about utility, you can have a lot of subjectiveness of what maximizes that utility. So, the easiest way to explain utilitarianism, those of you who don't understand it just by what the words utility and stuff mean, is think of it as a point system. You add points the more good things you do, you subtract points when you do bad things. And you want to minimize the negative points and maximize the positive points. So by doing that, when you mess things up like that, you just really just kind of, it gets into a subjective pissing match of how many points you should award to what thing, right? Like, someone could say that the steak meal maximizes utility because steaks are extremely tasty, nutritious, and you know, bring about a lot of pleasure to people. And therefore, you know, any suffering from a non-sentient animal doesn't matter in compared to what you get out of it. Not many utilitarians would argue. But the utilitarian could argue. The idea, though, is that you then call in their question, their ethical argument, you know, ethical ideas. But the thing is, though, is that, I mean, you can argue from a utilitarian perspective that having steak all the time maximizes utility. And that people not having steak is wrong. Seriously. Like, that could be a utilitarian argument. Bam. And you sit there and that would be horrible. Technically, it's still a valid utilitarian argument if you say, if you know, I could sacrifice 10,000 people to Cthulhu, and because Cthulhu will give me ultimate pleasure, or grant ultimate pleasure to the rest of the people, maximize everyone else's utility, you sacrifice those 1,000 people willingly, and it's a morally good thing. Yeah. There's some problems with utilitarianism. They try to get around it. I don't find their get around arguments very convincing. But hey, that's me. That's not necessarily everybody. So, you gotta. I'll take them at their word that they're utilitarians. I just don't think utilitarianism is a very good ethical policy.
So I don't see why, as a utilitarian, you would argue against that.
Because there are social because first of all, then all of us would be bad people because we all participate in some kind of unethical economic consumption. So if you want to argue, then all of us are engaging in bad behavior and we should disincentivize it to the greatest possible extent, I would agree with you. My criticism is when vegans get super fucking head up their ass and act like they're the only people who engage in ethical consumption and that everybody else is a bad person. Not that I, as a utilitarian, give a fuck about designations like good or bad person. I don't even know what those things mean, really. But when it comes to people's behavior, what really bothers me is the inconsistency. I think it's better if we broadly encourage people to cut back on harmful or unethical types of consumption rather than acting as though vegans have like a third eye that they've opened and they're the only ones who can see the truth of the matter and that everybody else is like a fucking Hitler times 12
Okay,
for perpetuating the animal holocaust.
So then would you reject then your saying there is no ethical consumption under capitalism? Because that's what you said. You said like, look, if you're saying that like, we should all disincentivize certain like.
Well, there kind of isn't, right? I mean, there are some places you can get ethical production from, but they're pretty few and far between.
You could, yeah, but there is like varieties of like negative utility, even from a utilitarian standpoint. So I could say that, look, the amount of harm perpetuated from animal agriculture is by far greater than the amount of harm perpetuated by like, I don't know, something like purchasing like, I don't know, a banana. So like that's measurable in terms of utility. And that's essentially how you would engage with ethical actions in the first place, right? You said that you don't understand personal responsibility, but of course you do, because personal.
Wait, what did I say? I don't understand personal responsibility.
You said that you don't understand like what it means to be like a good person. Sorry, that like a good or bad person.
Just those. The term good and bad person are meaningless in a consequentialist sense. A good person would just be a shorthand for a person who does good things.
Yeah.
And a bad person would be a shorthand for a person who does bad things.
Yeah.
But people who do good or do bad things, we all do good and bad things. And we all do them to varying extents, and those extents change with time. So the essentialist critique that vegans tend to engage in, where people who eat animal products are bad people, and they conveniently ignore all of the other ways in which they contribute to unethical industries, that's what bothers me.
Oh, I don't think that people eat meat are bad people. I think that people who eat meat are indoctrinated into a system which leads them to think that they are unculpable for their actions and that they ought not to do something about it when they have the power to modify the system to produce a greater overall consequence. To use
Would you levy that criticism against all people, including yourself?
I would say that is true against all people. Like, yeah, like I was indoctrinated. Absolutely.
Well,
no. I mean, like for you now, there has to be something that you do that you don't need to do.
Yeah, probably. I would say that like I'm trying to think of like of an example that would at least even be culpable to the amount of harm that is perpetuated by animal agriculture. But
if we want to talk about thresholds here, then yeah, animal agriculture is definitely a biggie. But then you could argue.
Can you think of anything as big, nearly as big, even? I mean, as a utilitarianism, it's about numbers, right? We're compiling moral value, like one sentient being at a time.
Superseding responsibilities. So you could argue then that the reason why we can't meaningfully deal with animal agriculture is because of capitalism, and that you actually bolster capitalism when you order stuff off of Amazon. So while it may be the case that animal agriculture does more harm to society, you actually can't address the animal agriculture until all the greedy people who buy up all the shit off Amazon stop doing the stuff that they're doing. And then it's like, okay, maybe actually...
That's like, I'm sorry to say, but that's a really bad take, because you can address a single market within capitalism without addressing the system itself. And then two, you could also say that, look, you're like, yeah, perpetuating capitalism is bad. If you're funding Amazon, that is bad. But then it's depend, or implies can. And I think that's relative even to I think that's...
Well, I don't say ought generally.
Okay, but even if that's your problem. Ought will be my problem, you know. But essentially, like, if ought implies can, which I would say it does, that if your ability to, if you should do something, you have to be able to do it. Then if you can't help but participate somewhat in capitalism, then you aren't responsible for the minor amounts of participation. Like, how far you propagate that system is what you are responsible for, which is essentially my point about landlords. Like, if you're a tenant, you are enriching landlords. It just so happens that you are promoting landlordship. You know what I mean? You are actually promoting people owning and commodifying property. Now that's a negative, but you don't have a choice. You are economically coerced into that because you are the slave in the master-slave relationship. If you are the landlord, you are the
You could be homeless if you really wanted to.
if you oh right, and being homeless does what? Ultimately undermines the whole point, which is essentially that individuals are not being allowed to express like a minimum living standard by having a house that they can call theirs. So
Well, the point, if you back it up, is utility. You don't want people to be homeless because it makes them miserable, but it also makes people sad to not eat cheese.
well, I would say one, it's about subjectivity and its expression in terms of the freedom of the individual, which I think is a much better benchmark. But if you talk about like let's say utility, yeah, like cheese might promote positive utility, but it's nowhere near the negative utility of the consumption of animals in slitting their
Oh,
throats.
no, I
And
mean,
See, here's where I get it, right? If you're a socialist, that's what I don't get. You're a socialist. You want the means of production to be owned by the public. He earlier stated that, housing should be publicly owned so that, or privately owned. There should only be private housing or public housing, whatever, right? It just says that people should have the freedom to own their own houses. They should be able to own their own houses. This is where socialists just, it's like, you do realize the government zoning laws are responsible for a lot of housing shortages, right? Like not being able to make large apartment buildings is the lack of rent and why rent is so high. Like there are reasons for these things. Like these things aren't just things that happen in a vacuum. And most of the problems are because public entities control it. Think about an apartment complex owned by a corporation that manages apartment complexes. Like their whole thing is they buy up land, they build apartments, then they rent it out to people. That is their whole business model. That is the corporation's business model, is to accumulate property, build apartments, rent those apartments out. Okay. First of all, if they're building up that much capital, it's not a little private landlord. Not in any way, shape, or form. It's probably a public corporation. If it's a public corporation, it's owned by the public. If it's owned by the public, because it's a public corporation, that's socialism. Congratulations. Public ownership of property for the benefit of the public, because the public benefits those who own the business that's publicly ownable benefit from it. Socialism, yay! Massive rent corporations that annoy everybody, that no one likes, that we think are horrible, that we complain about all the time, and that you point to and say, this is the horrors of capitalism. That's socialism. Stop advocating for what you don't like. Like, learn what these words mean. Learn that the public sector is horrible and that you should allow for private property. That the government shouldn't own all the property and you shouldn't be taxed for owning property. Why is the government being a massive landlord and you're advocating for government ownership of the property when it already owns it? Like, this is the problem. Like, this is exactly what the problem is. Like, understand what is causing the problem. Honestly, like, know the difference between public and private. Please. Just please understand the difference.
I mean,
Mm.
And it's the
the
same with
world is
homelessness.
literally
It's
burning right now
yeah,
with
but it's
climate change
literally the
perpetuated
same.
by global
But
capitalism.
you've literally
Maybe
just
the ethical
disproved your
wait.
your analogy to homelessness, because like you could choose to be homeless, but then by doing so you'd be producing more negative utility. So you are
Well,
coerced
you'd be
on an
producing. Well,
ethical.
hold on. You'd be producing more negative utility for yourself. Maybe if everyone just decided to go out and rough it in the woods, sure, they'd produce negative utility for themselves, but they would destabilize global capitalism to the extent that it would no longer be possible to perpetuate global warming to the extent that we do now.
Okay, but the whole point of it being a system in the first place and a political action is it only destabilizes once a collective group of individuals gets involved and a certain like threshold of individuals chooses not to participate. Landlords can't exist because there's no tenants. Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. But then obviously then you've made a massive homelessness issue, and so the negative utilities increased anyway, directly proportionate to the political advocacy of those individuals. So
Yeah,
which
but you
is
only
it?
have to do it long enough to end capitalism, and then you can go back to living in your co-op houses afterwards.
Well, one, like you've already one, like homelessness could kill you by that point, and two, that's like absolutely not comparable to someone avoiding meat, dairy, and eggs,
Do
which
you
causes
understand
them
the
very.
argument that I'm making that this all feels incredibly subjective?
How
This
does
is
it
what I
feel?
mean
How?
about vegan.
Where's
Wait,
the
this is what I mean
subjectivity?
about vegans. Wait, hold on. This is what I mean about vegans, dude, okay? Vegans are you're correct, by the way, that when you purchase animal products, you contribute harm and that we shouldn't do that. That's correct. And I've always said that on stream. I've always agreed with that. The problem that I get is when you get incredibly condescending to people who don't align on this specific take, but then you're incredibly permissive and defensive of every other type of commodity engagement. That's the thing that bothers me. If you came over here like a fucking Chad with your massive fucking cock and balls hanging out, and you were like, yeah, I'm actually talking to you right now with Wi Fi I'm leeching from a library using computer parts that I assembled from a dumpster. I don't buy anything from the system. All people must maximize collective utility by living off the grid. If you did that, then I would have to say, fuck. You're objectively morally superior to me.
Or you could
You've
just say
taken a
that your
great personal
political
sacrifice to
advocacy,
avoid using your commodity purchasing power to contribute to unethical systems.
or you
And
could
if you
be
just came here to
politically
say, I think
advantageous.
people should do better on these issues in general, that would also be good. But for you to come here and say, hey, veganism's number one, veganism's the issue we need to be focusing on, and all these other things, we don't really have a choice. That's what bothers me.
You're a utilitarian, so veganism being number one should hold relevance to the amount of sentient beings which are harmed, which are considered equal under your, moral takes. And two, I would say that your political advocacy isn't dependent upon just like your engagement. Let's say you're homeless, Chad leeching Wi-Fi, promoting that lifestyle. You're ultimately going to undermine the value of the subjectivity and the utility that you are trying to propagate anyway. It's not a rational take, and that's the importance of reasons.
Well,
You destroy
have
the
you
system.
ever like bought anything from like any store ever that wasn't a cooperative? There are lines here. If you, I can acknowledge that animal agriculture is the worst of them. I just wish that you would acknowledge that it's a gradient. Um,
Like
it's a
I can honestly agree that there is a gradient in terms of like, look, if you are buying iPhones unnecessary, like you buy a new iPhone every year, yeah, you're doing the wrong thing, absolutely. And I think that ethical consumerism is a gradient. I just think that the most pressing ethical consumerist action is veganism, primarily because we can destabilize an entire market. Okay, like not okay, we don't have to challenge the entire system. Like as socialists, we are taking a much greater endeavor than veganism. We have to destabilize an entire global capitalist climate. We have to destabilize the global economy and swap it out for something entirely different. We need to not only destroy this one, but we need to propagate a new and functioning system. All we need to do in veganism is stop animal agriculture, which is already not profitable, which propagates the suffering of countless trillions of animals, if we include sea life, and ultimately
okay.
is entirely
This
unnecessary.
again, this is what I mean.
But
You
what do you
still
mean?
haven't acknowledged it.
Well, I did acknowledge it. I just said that there is a variance. I just said that that veganism is the most pressing one. Clearly,
But then you preached. So can we acknowledge then
about
that there are
how
many
could you say that it's
systems.
preaching? Like, I just want to say, how can you say that it's preaching when you're a
I've never
utilitarian
talked.
and you expect that individuals have like a right to life, or like, or a value in their experiences, at least, you know?
That's
Like
what I mean.
like why would you say that it's preaching? Like, that's what I want to know.
I've never talked to a vegan who didn't give me the speech. I think that animal lives carry inherent moral right. I've always believed that. If I didn't, I wouldn't advocate vegan ethics.
But
But
you don't.
it's always like I say the same thing. I always say I don't like the fact that vegans completely ignore all other ways in which commodity consumption can be unethical. They just like dive bomb veganism. It's really
But
hypocritical.
I didn't
And
do
then
that.
they say, huh?
I didn't do that. I said that there is all
Uh,
forms of commodity, all forms of commodification can be exploitative, and we should engage in relation to how much power we have in the market. And I've been incredibly consistent upon that point. I just said that we have the most power in veganism, and it's the worst one. So, in what way have I dismissed your position in terms of capitalism? I'm a socialist.
I feel like especially early on in this conversation, you definitely tried to circumnavigate the accusation that this is something that could be equally applied to a bunch of different fields. That was definitely an impression that I got initially.
No,
But I mean, if we want to talk past that, which would probably be preferable,
well, I'll make a quick point if you like. All I was saying when I was talking about necessitated markets is that there are certain markets which are unavoidable. Like, as in, like, as you say, like, for example, the consumption of a certain amount of food, water, and shelter, for example, as a society, is unavoidable. We are coerced into that by either capitalism or nature.
okay, but I'm not talking about needing to drink water that you get from your local plumbing tap. I'm talking about the a constant pleasure-based commodity consumption that people tend to engage in if
Yeah,
they are
like
not desperately
hedonistic
poor.
consumerism.
Yes, hedonistic consumerism. So, okay, do you think a person is a bad person if they eat meat?
No, normally I think they're indoctrinated. I think they're doing a bad thing
Okay, indoctrinated into what?
into an ideology which allows them to dismiss their responsibilities to the market and their responsibility for animal suffering and death. They think it's natural, normal, and necessary.
Okay. And what if a person thinks that like slaughterhouses are cruel?
They are cruel to both animals and humans.
Right. So what if a person thinks that? So they have enough cognitions to recognize that.
So they think that they're cruel, but then choose not to act.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a hypocrite.
I'm not asking if they're a hypocrite. I'm asking if they're a bad person.
Are they bad? What would I count as bad? Yeah, I would say they're bad because they're acting irrationally. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to talk about what we mean by good and bad in the first place, I'd say that, like, when we talk about good and bad actions in the first place, we're talking about reasons. And I'd say that that has to be grounded. This is why I was leading to the Frege Geach embedding problem, because I think that your ethics is ultimately so ungrounded that your interpretation of what good and bad at any given point determines what you would say is good and bad. And since you always
What
say
have I
that,
said that's ungrounded?
well, like the words good, bad, right, and wrong, every time you say them are ungrounded.
What do you mean by ungrounded?
As in, like, flying in some sort of subjective vacuum in which you've just assumed, like, some sort of given end.
You mean because I'm not a moral realist?
Yeah, I mean that because you're not a moral realist, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't care.
But you,
Dude,
but
no
even,
wonder moral realists are so insufferable to talk to.
But you
They're like,
could-
I can't dignify this conversation where you have not even axiomatically grounded your principles in the epistemological framework of reality. Come off it.
So
Axioms are subjectively
I'm
determined. They're
being
what you prefer.
insufferable, but you're putting on silly voices.
Yes, that is correct.
I think that that's somewhat.
No, come on. You're telling me that that I'm ungrounded and that I can't make decisive takes on this because I'm not a moral realist?
Yeah, 100%. Like, do you want to? I was expressing the Frege Geach embedding problem, in which basically
I don't know the Frege Geach embedding problem.
you said that you understood it about a couple of minutes ago.
No. Chat, did I say I understood I don't remember saying I understood a thing.
I follow
that
you.
sounded
I'm
like
with you.
that.
Yeah, I get it. And then you went back. But what about my devastating take?
Oh yeah, I might have just been ignoring you at that point because it didn't sound like it was relevant at all.
Oh, right.
But
So,
I mean, you can
uh,
try again if you want to.
okay, yeah. So all I was saying
Oh,
is that,
was this the Wittgensteinian thing? Was this
yeah,
about how
yeah, yeah.
the collective idea of an object
Look,
exists
like,
only
like,
insofar as
yeah, like, look, if even if you were like some sort of like socio-political like
I know
relativist,
Wittgenstein.
you know Wittgenstein, okay? So you understand that you can't have a private language game.
Well, I mean, you can for all the good it'll do, but it's not
Like,
really meaningful.
well, that's the thing. What are you saying is that you can't have it's not a language. It wouldn't function as a language. You wouldn't be able to convey ideas. You wouldn't even be able to hold those ideas constant in relation to your own thinking. So you can't do it. You would say that you can't.
Yeah, so your argument is essentially that moral anti-realism is ungrounded because it's impossible for people who don't have the same subjectively determined values to have a conversation with each other.
Well, what I would say is that you like what I'm saying is that your position in relation to using words like good, bad, right, and wrong in terms of like creating a system in which you try and evaluate judgments is ultimately impossible if you accept moral anti-realism, and you should instead be a nihilist
How? Why?
because
But I
the
have
words
values that I think are good.
what are those values? That's what I'm saying. Those values, you can't know what they are.
I can.
How do
They're
you
my axioms. I chose them. I picked them out.
how do you choose your axioms?
I wanted them.
Okay, and how do you know that? Like
I
what's
know that I
holding
want them because they're the
what
thing that I want when I think of them.
well, that's the thing. So it's your interpretation of your desire at any given moment.
Yeah.
So
My desire at any given moment has remained consistent since I arrived at my first principles.
so how do you know it's remained consistent? Because that's the Frege-Gitchin betting problem, in which you basically can't show that you are being consistent from one moment to the next. That's the whole
Who
point.
cares?
So in which case, how can you say you're being consistent? You're saying is it that you don't
I
care?
am being consistent.
But how do you know
My
that?
axioms
That's
change. My axioms change, and my interpretation of those axioms change. The world shifts around me and my perspective. Doesn't matter. Those positions remain consistent because they're relative to my axioms.
But
If the axioms change, everything else orbits around them.
even like what I would say is even the words themselves, right? Like your ability to convey a certain idea, I'd say like your ability to even maintain any manner of argumentation falls apart. In which case, how do you even know whether
How?
socialism's good or
I
bad?
argue with people
or,
all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying that you argue. Yeah, you do argue with people all the time. I'm not saying you. I'm saying you're doing it badly.
How?
Yeah,
Because I'm saying that you don't have any manner of holding yourself consistent.
this is every ethicist's problem with moral subjectivism. There is no way, if you're a moral subjectivist, there's no way to even talk about ethics with you. Just no way to talk ethics. Just no logical way. Like, you need you need to have some sort of moral objectivism to be able to properly discuss ethics, because otherwise you are just adrift in the sea with no anchor, like no port of entry that you're heading towards or anything. You're just being blown about by the wind. Your moral axioms can change at a whim. How do I know that you're not changing them on the whim? You know, like, a moral objectivists have rules and they can change those rules. But they have rules that like life is important or something like that. Like, there's rules to judge actions by. Whereas those who are moral subjectivists have no rules. Like, for the most part, like, perspective philosophy does very well. He just doesn't understand the economics or economic terms that he's using when he's talking about socialism and capitalism. He's running on the labor theory of value, and this is where I have my issues with a lot of socialists, is that they just seem to not understand what they don't seem to understand the terminology It's because they've been indoctrinated into it. And what they really want, morally, is they want capitalism. That's what they really want. Like, if you want the worker to own the means of production, you want the individual to own the means of production. You don't want the public to own the means of production. You don't want corporations to own everything. You don't want the government to own everything. You want the people to own everything. The private individual. Ta-da! Capitalism. Like everything that socialists complain about. Like everything that self-described socialists complain about is a result of socialism. It might be a different form of socialism than you want, but it's still a form of socialism. Oh, hello. Hello. I think corporations are bad. Okay, so you think socialism. No, 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 no. I want the government to redistribute all the wealth and tax the corporations out of existence and then give the wealth to everyone else. Oh, so you're just another socialist complaining about how other socialists managed to screw you over and how you want to screw everyone else over. That's great. Yeah, but basically what it is. It's socialists fighting socialists over how to best be a socialist. And their Hitler word for economics is a capitalist. So corporations are currently on top. They're the socialists in charge. So they're the evil capitalists now because they're the ones in charge. If they were on charge, the evil capitalists that are right now would be the socialists saying how these guys are the evil capitalists. That's why socialism's never really been tried, because their personal version of socialism hasn't been brought into reality yet, and therefore it'll work when they do it. Now, socialism has been tried over and over and over again, and the more socialist you become, the worse off everyone is, not the better off everyone is. Plain and simple. Anyway, it's getting really late, and I do need to go and work for a wonderful public entity that, will treat me like a cog in a machine and pay me to do it for many, many hours of work. But yeah, you hear people saying that they're pro-capitalism and think business is good, or corporations are good, or corporations are people. Any of those arguments, those are not capitalist arguments. They don't support capitalism. A capitalist, a real true to God capitalist, hates big business, hates corporations, thinks they're the worst thing in existence because they're public corporations and they're not privately controlled. They're publicly controlled. So just remember that. Like, for all of you who want to support capitalism, capitalism does not mean that you become Amazon. Amazon cannot exist in a capitalist system because if private individuals have to control everything, organizations can only get so big. They can only get so big because they're just not capable of organizing on such a large, massive scale as a private individual. Decisions get spread out and eventually they become public. Like eventually they become owned by the public. Too many people have their fingers in the pot, and it becomes public. That's how things are. So, that being said, I think they're wrapping up here. It doesn't look like it looks like it's only a half hour. And let me tell you, they're going to probably get stuck in this circle for the rest of this time. Like seriously. Once the moral objectivist catches a moral subjectivist in this trap in this conversation, it goes around and around and around and around forever. So I'm going to consider this done. Say, have a good night. I'm going to go to sleep. Go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, follow me on YouTube at Fat Troll Gaming. Also, subscribe on YouTube. Hit a like, hit that little subscribe bell, and share this on social media if you liked it. And go ahead and also follow me on Twitch. I stream usually every day for about an hour in the middle of the day, some sort of game. And if you guys like this, I'll look at some other videos that kind of bug me and give you my thoughts